My name is Jay Thompson. I'm 35 years old, and this happened in the summer of 2023. I had always craved adventure, a need to prove that the rational world I knew was the only one there was. That summer, my best friend Mike Roberts, the ever-anxious yet endearing Mike, and Sarah Daniels, whose intuition and empathy bordered on the mystical, joined me on what we believed would be an unforgettable RV camping trip into the remote bayou of North Louisiana. We had planned to explore the eerie legends of Black Bayou Lake, a place steeped in history, mystery, and whispered tragedies. We set off in our aging RV, a rattling vehicle that had seen better days. The equipment we brought along was far from top of the line. Cameras that flickered at the worst possible moments, a faulty GPS that insisted on taking us on scenic detours, and a cell phone that only caught a signal sporadically. Even before we left, there were hints that this journey would test our limits. Our plans were marred by constant bickering. Mike's nerves clashed with my skepticism, and Sarah's open-minded fascination with the supernatural. Still, we pressed on, eager to document and experience the legends firsthand. Our destination was deep in the bayou, where the land seemed to whisper secrets of long-lost stories. The journey itself was tortuous. Every wrong turn sent us deeper into uncharted backwoods, and the old RV groaned and sputtered along dusty roads. By the time we reached a narrow, overgrown path leading to Black Bayou Lake, the sun was sinking behind dense clusters of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The air was heavy with humidity and a foreboding sense of isolation. We set up camp on a small clearing beside the murky water, our RV parked as if it were a reluctant participant in this eerie tableau. I remember the moment clearly. The sky was a deep indigo, and the only light came from our meager campfire and the scattered stars above. As the fire crackled, we huddled close, sharing ghost stories and local legends that Sarah had unearthed. One particular tale stood out, a story of a vengeful spirit, the ghost of a woman in a tattered white dress. According to local lore, she was the doomed soul of a victim of a brutal massacre of indigenous people, a massacre tainted by the rituals of a lost cannibal cult that once roamed these lands. The story was not just a ghost tale, it was a grim reminder of historical injustice and dark magic. That night, the first unsettling signs emerged. I was half asleep when I heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but then I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing. I squinted into the darkness and thought I saw a figure, a woman in white, drifting silently between the trees. My heart hammered in my chest, and I nudged Mike, who was already wide-eyed in his bunk. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling more than I cared to admit. Mike mumbled something incoherent, his anxiety spiking visibly, while Sarah, though visibly disturbed, pulled out her notepad. "It's exactly as the legend says," she murmured, her voice low and haunted. I tried to shake off the dread, attributing it to our overactive imaginations fueled by campfire tales. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the chill creeping up my spine. The next day was a mix of mundane tasks and growing tension. We attempted to drive further into the bayou to capture more evidence of the supernatural, but the RV's engine sputtered and coughed, forcing us to stop at an old, dilapidated service station. While I fiddled with the engine, Mike paced nervously, and Sarah inspected the area, her keen eyes noting every odd detail. A strange symbol carved into a wooden post, the lingering smell of something burnt, and a sense of foreboding that clung to the place. That evening, as we resumed our journey, the RV's interior became a pressure cooker of anxiety. Our equipment continued to malfunction. The camera shutter jammed, the battery died inexplicably, and even the radio seemed to emit static whispers of its own. We began to suspect that the land itself was conspiring to sabotage our modern technology. The isolation was palpable, and every shadow seemed to hide a secret. The real turning point came on our third night. We had parked near a bend in the bayou where the water lapped softly at the muddy shore. After a hastily prepared dinner, we gathered in the RV for what we hoped would be a calm night. The wind had picked up, and the branches outside danced eerily in the darkness. It was then that we heard the chanting, a low, rhythmic murmur that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the swamp. I could feel my skin crawl as the sound grew louder, echoing around our fragile sanctuary. "Do you hear that?" Mike whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing cacophony. Sarah's eyes widened, and she clutched her notepad like a talisman. I couldn't decide if it was a natural phenomenon or something far more sinister. My skepticism battled with the undeniable strangeness of the moment. As the chanting continued, the temperature in the RV dropped sharply. Frost began to form on the window, and I felt an unseen presence press against the glass. In a desperate bid to reassure us, I cracked the door open, only to be met by a gust of wind carrying the faint scent of decay and old earth. That was when we found the footprints. They were fresh, large, and erratically spaced around our RV, too large to be from any animal known to these parts, and too human-like in their irregular pattern. The next few hours were a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The ghostly chanting intensified, punctuated by moments of violent silence. Then came the attack. Without warning, the RV shook violently as if struck by an unseen force. The door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire vehicle, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of dread. I could see in the periphery of my vision the figure in white, the ghost of the woman whose tragic story Sarah had so meticulously recorded. She floated toward us, her eyes filled with a sorrow that was as deep as it was vengeful. "Get down!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the roaring silence that followed her approach. Mike, paralyzed by fear, froze, while Sarah grabbed her recorder, her hands trembling. I moved to shield them both, but the spectral figure extended a translucent hand toward me, and I felt an icy grip that nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. The entity was no passive spirit. She was angry, violent even, a manifestation of a dark past demanding retribution. In the chaos that ensued, our long-standing tensions erupted. Mike's anxiety exploded into panic as he scrambled to secure the RV's doors, his shouts mingling with the ghost's eerie wails. Sarah, ever the scholar of the paranormal, frantically flipped through her notes, searching for a clue, a ritual or an incantation that might appease this malevolent force. I found myself torn between protecting my friends and confronting the reality that the supernatural was not something to be dismissed or negotiated with. I managed to force the RV doors open enough for us to flee into the night, leaving behind the false safety of our metal shelter. We stumbled into the bayou, the oppressive darkness swallowing us whole. The ghost pursued us, her presence manifesting as both a physical and psychological assault. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed to herald her arrival. We reached a small, abandoned cabin that Sarah remembered reading about, a place where a local voodoo priest, a man known as Papa Lucien, had once resided. Desperation overrode our doubts as we sought him out, believing that his knowledge of ancient rites could help us stave off the terror that relentlessly chased us. The cabin was a ramshackle structure, its windows boarded up and its door hanging off its hinges. Inside, we found remnants of rituals long past, faded symbols etched into the wooden walls, jars of strange herbs, and an overwhelming aura of sorrow and regret. It was in this cabin that we encountered Papa Lucien himself, a gaunt, enigmatic figure who seemed as much a part of the bayou as the twisting cypress trees. He regarded us with a mix of pity and determination. "You have stirred something that should have remained undisturbed," he said in a gravelly voice that resonated with ancient knowledge. "The spirit you face is not merely a ghost. It is the embodiment of a curse born from injustice, a soul damned to avenge the atrocities committed against her people. To appease her, you must acknowledge the wrongs of the past." Sarah's eyes shone with both hope and fear as she clutched her notepad. "What must we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Papa Lucien explained that we would need to perform a ritual, a series of rites passed down through generations, to honor the dead and seek forgiveness on behalf of those who had been wronged. The ritual was delicate and dangerous, requiring precise timing and unwavering belief. We returned to the RV, our hearts heavy with the knowledge that the spirit was not going to rest until justice was served. That night, as we gathered the necessary items, candles, salt, and relics from the cabin, we prepared for the ritual in the clearing near the bayou. The air was thick with tension, and every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive darkness. As the ritual commenced, I took the lead, reciting the incantations that Papa Lucien had taught us. Sarah and Mike stood on either side of me, their faces lit by the flickering glow of candlelight. The chanting resumed, now emanating not from the bayou, but from deep within our very souls. The spirit appeared once more, a terrifying vision of the woman in white, her eyes burning with an unyielding fury. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The ghost's presence was overwhelming, and I felt as if my very soul was being weighed and judged. Then, as if in response to our sincere pleas and the acknowledgement of past wrongs, the ghost's form wavered. Her violent energy began to dissipate, replaced by a sorrowful calm, but the cost of our confrontation was steep. In the midst of the ritual, as we focused our energies on appeasing the spirit, Mike, whose anxiety had been a constant undercurrent, stumbled and fell. In the ensuing confusion, a burst of raw, uncontrolled energy surged forth. I watched in horror as the spectral force unleashed by the chaos lashed out violently. Mike's cry was swallowed by the darkness, and when the light returned to the clearing, he lay motionless on the ground. The loss of Mike shattered our fragile camaraderie. In that harrowing moment, I felt an indescribable blend of guilt, sorrow, and terror. Sarah's sobs filled the night, and I found myself questioning everything I once believed about the natural and supernatural worlds. The ritual, though it had quelled the immediate threat, came at an unbearable price. The ghost, now a sorrowful apparition, seemed to mourn the violence that had been inflicted upon her, her form dissipating into the cool night air as if seeking peace at last. In the aftermath, Sarah and I gathered our meager belongings and made our way back to the RV. The journey home was a silent, grim procession. Every mile we traveled was laden with the weight of loss and the realization that some forces in this world are beyond human control. The once crisp laughter and banter between us had been replaced by a profound silence, punctuated only by the distant calls of nocturnal creatures and the rustling of the bayou trees. Back in civilization, life moved on in a blur of routine and disbelief. I tried to convince myself that what had happened was merely a tragic convergence of misfortune and myth, a cautionary tale to be shared at campfires and recorded on Sarah's podcast. But deep within, the memories lingered like scars. I often found myself gazing into the darkness, half expecting to see that spectral figure gliding silently in the shadows. Sarah's podcast episodes became a chronicle of our ordeal. She meticulously documented every detail, every nuance of our encounter with the supernatural. Her recordings, filled with trembling voices and the echoes of that cursed night, served as a stark reminder of the fragile boundary between our world and the realm of the inexplicable. In her work, she strived to honor Mike's memory, ensuring that the tale of our survival and the price we paid was not forgotten. I have come to realize that our journey into the bayou was more than a reckless adventure. It was an encounter with the deep, unhealed wounds of history. The spirit we faced was not simply an evil presence. It was the embodiment of a tragedy that had been buried beneath layers of time and neglect. Her anger, her sorrow, and her desire for retribution were a mirror to the injustices inflicted upon indigenous peoples and the dark practices that once festered in the backwoods of Louisiana. Now, whenever I pass by Black Bayou Lake, I feel the weight of that night. I remember Mike's desperate eyes, the chilling echo of the ghost's lament, and the palpable tension that gripped us as we fought to survive forces beyond our comprehension. I also remember the words of Papa Lucien, words that remind me that sometimes, in the quest for understanding, we must confront the harsh truths of the past. My nights are no longer undisturbed. Even in the safety of my home, I often hear the distant murmur of chanting and feel an inexplicable chill, as if the bayou has followed me, whispering its secrets into my dreams. I learned that survival isn't just about escaping danger. It's about confronting the darkness that lurks in the corners of our history and our hearts. In the end, I emerged from that experience forever changed. The line between myth and reality had blurred, and I could no longer dismiss the possibility that some legends were born from truth. My name is Jay Thompson, and I carry the scars, both visible and hidden, of that haunting on Black Bayou. I have come to understand that while technology and modernity may shield us from many dangers, there are some terrors that transcend time, echoing the injustices and tragedies of our collective past. For anyone considering a journey into the depths of these haunted backwoods, I offer this warning. Respect the land, honor its history, and never underestimate the power of the supernatural. The bayou is not merely a place, it is a living, breathing archive of sorrow and retribution, and those who dare to disturb its slumber do so at their own peril. My name is David Reyes. I'm 42 years old, and this all happened in the summer of 2023. I was running from the ghosts of my past, a failed relationship, a job I never truly loved, and a heart weighed down by regret. I craved solitude and healing, so I bought an old RV and set off into the heart of North Louisiana, aiming for the quiet embrace of Sabine National Forest. I believed that isolation, deep in the woods and along the winding Sabine River, could offer me both solace and a chance to rebuild who I once was. The RV was a relic, creaky, unreliable, and filled with quirks that made every mile an adventure in itself. From malfunctioning electronics to a rickety engine that coughed more than it purred, it quickly became clear that my trusty mobile sanctuary was as much a character in this journey as I was. I had no companions but my thoughts, a battered journal for notes, and the hope that the vast wilderness might ease my inner turmoil. A few days into the trip, while parked at a remote clearing near the edge of a dense stand of oak and pine, I decided to clean out the storage compartment of the RV. A cramped space littered with forgotten camping gear, old maps, and miscellaneous odds and ends. That's when I found it. A small, leather-bound diary wedged between a box of mismatched tools and a bundle of yellowed newspapers. Its cover was worn, the pages brittle with age, and it emanated an inexplicable air of melancholy. Curiosity overpowered caution. I began to read the diary that very evening by the soft glow of a single lantern. The entries were cryptic. Sketches of strange symbols carved into trees, descriptions of eerie disappearances, and references to clandestine meetings held under the cover of darkness along trails I'd only just begun to explore. One entry, dated back to the early 1970s, mentioned Sabine Trail explicitly. It spoke of a shadowy local conspiracy involving the exploitation of indigenous lands and secretive gatherings that ended in unexplained vanishings. The writer's tone was one of quiet dread, as if each word was a confession of something terrible witnessed but never spoken aloud. The following morning, I set out to explore the area around my campsite. The diary's entries seemed to hint that the truth lay hidden in plain sight. As I hiked along a narrow path, I noticed odd carvings on the trunks of trees, symbols that matched those in the diary. They were etched deeply into the bark, almost as if someone had been desperate to leave a message. I couldn't help but feel that every step I took was guided by a hand I couldn't see. I began to wonder if fate had led me here. My heart, still bruised from past hurts, now pounded with the thrill of a mystery unfolding around me. However, the more I delved into the forest, the heavier a sense of isolation became. It wasn't just the physical solitude of the wilderness, it was a deeper, more profound loneliness, as though the forest itself were mourning forgotten tragedies. During my explorations, I encountered a few locals in small, out-of-the-way towns near the forest's edge. Their eyes held secrets, and their answers were always vague whenever I mentioned the diary or the disappearances detailed within. At one dusty diner, an elderly man with a weathered face gave me a long, piercing look and muttered, "Some things are better left buried, son." His words, simple yet foreboding, sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't tell if he was warning me about the diary's power or cautioning me against dredging up old wounds. The RV, unreliable as ever, soon began to exhibit more signs of its aging nature. One afternoon, while driving along a particularly rough stretch of Sabine Trail, the engine sputtered and died. I was stranded in a clearing where the dense forest loomed on all sides, the silence broken only by the distant murmur of the Sabine River. With no cell signal to call for help, I had no choice but to wait and attempt to fix the engine myself. The isolation, compounded by the ticking clock of impending nightfall, made me feel vulnerable, as if the forest were closing in around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As dusk approached that day, I returned to the RV with a mixture of frustration and unease. I sat on the creaky steps of the old vehicle, diary in hand, rereading the entries that hinted at hidden rendezvous points and coded messages. The forest around me grew dim and shadowy, and I couldn't help but notice that the symbols carved on trees seemed to glow faintly in the fading light. It was as if the diary's secrets were trying to communicate with me, urging me to uncover more. That night, as a heavy mist rolled in from the river and enveloped the clearing, the atmosphere took on a surreal quality. I lit a small campfire, its flickering light barely pushing back the oppressive darkness. I sat silently, lost in thought when I began to hear it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps echoing around the RV. At first, I convinced myself it was just the wind or perhaps a curious animal. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more deliberate. I decided to step outside. The cool night air was thick with moisture and the scent of damp earth. The mist swirled around me as I moved toward the source of the sound. My heart raced, and every instinct told me to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. As I peered into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shadow flitting between the trees. It wasn't human, but its movement was deliberate, almost as if it were watching me. A chill shot through me. I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. The engine still coughed feebly, and the interior of the RV suddenly felt claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in. I sat at the small table, diary open before me, trying to find rational explanations for the events of the day. But deep down, I knew that the diary was more than just a collection of faded memories. It was a map, a guide to something that had been hidden for decades. Over the next few days, I followed the diary's clues with a mix of determination and trepidation. I retraced the diary's directions along winding forest paths and desolate trails. I even found remnants of an old, abandoned cabin deep in the forest, its wooden structure barely holding together. Inside the cabin, I discovered more clues: faded photographs, letters, and documents that confirmed the diary's chilling account of secret meetings and dark rituals conducted by a shadowy group. The evidence pointed to a local conspiracy, one that involved exploitation, corruption, and perhaps even human trafficking, all hidden beneath layers of silence and fear. The further I delved into the mystery, the more I felt a creeping paranoia. I began to sense that I was not alone, that unseen eyes were following my every move. Every rustle in the underbrush, every creak of the RV's aging frame, sent my mind spiraling into dark possibilities. I started to question whether my own inner demons were blending with the supernatural elements of the diary. Was the paranoia a product of my troubled past, or was there truly something sinister at work? One particularly stormy evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance and rain pounded the RV's roof, I received a visit from an unexpected source. A local woman, appearing out of the swirling mist, knocked on my door. She was dressed in a long-worn coat, her eyes dark and full of secrets. "You shouldn't be digging into things you don't understand," she warned in a hushed tone, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Some truths are dangerous, and some paths are better left alone." Her warning only deepened my resolve. I thanked her tersely and let her go, but her words echoed in my mind long after she had disappeared into the storm. That night, I barely slept, haunted by visions of shadowy figures and the persistent sense that I was being pursued. By the end of the week, the clues in the diary began to converge. The carvings in the trees, the strange symbols on the abandoned cabin walls, and the cryptic notes all pointed toward a final destination, a hidden clearing deep within Sabine National Forest, far from any well-trodden path. The diary mentioned that in this clearing lay the heart of the conspiracy, where the local enforcers, the silent guardians of a dark secret, had once gathered to carry out unspeakable acts. Determined to uncover the truth, I set out early one misty morning. The forest was eerily quiet as I navigated through narrow, overgrown paths. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of wet leaves. Hours passed, and the forest gradually opened into a wide, secluded clearing. In the center stood an old stone monument, covered in moss and lichen, a memorial of sorts, its meaning lost to time. Surrounding the monument were remnants of campfires and signs that people had once gathered here in secret. I approached the monument cautiously, the diary clenched tightly in my hand. As I examined the stone, I noticed fresh markings etched into its surface, symbols identical to those in the diary. My pulse quickened. I felt as if I had stumbled upon the very epicenter of the conspiracy the diary described. Before I could examine further, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my ears, and saw a group of figures emerging from the trees. They moved with a coordinated precision, their faces obscured by shadow and rain. For a moment, I was frozen with fear. These were no random wanderers. They were the local enforcers mentioned in the diary, the very guardians of the dark secrets I had been unraveling. Their eyes glinted with an intensity that left no room for negotiation. I realized in that instant that I was caught in a dangerous game. The evidence I had gathered, The questions I had pursued had led me into the crosshairs of those determined to keep the past buried. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices low and menacing. I couldn't understand every word, but I grasped the message. I was not welcome here, and my presence threatened to expose the conspiracy that had haunted these woods for decades. The leader of the group, a tall man with steely eyes, stepped forward and said, "Some stories are meant to stay hidden, Mr. Reyes. It's best if you forget what you've seen." Fear and adrenaline surged through me. I realized that my only chance was to escape with the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. I bolted from the clearing, my heart pounding as I sprinted through the forest. Behind me, shouts erupted, and I could hear the sound of pursuit. The forest seemed to twist and contort as I ran, branches clawing at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me up. Every shadow became a potential threat, every rustle a sign of the enforcers closing in. I ducked into a thicket, pausing to catch my breath and plan my next move. The diary was still with me, a silent witness to everything that had happened. I knew I couldn't let these men silence the truth. Gathering my courage, I decided to risk one last desperate move. I would send the evidence to a trusted investigative journalist known for exposing local corruption. I fumbled with my old, unreliable cell phone, trying to piece together a message that would deliver the damning evidence. The minutes stretched into an eternity as I heard the sound of footsteps drawing nearer. The enforcers eventually broke through the undergrowth. I could see their shadowy forms closing in, and I felt a cold certainty that if I were caught, my story would end in silence, and perhaps worse. With no other choice, I bolted once more into the maze-like forest, dodging trees and leaping over tangled roots. The storm that had begun earlier still raged, lending a chaotic soundtrack to my desperate escape. Somehow, after what felt like an endless chase, I managed to lose them in the labyrinth of trees and emerge onto a narrow, muddy path. The enforcers' shouts faded into the distance, replaced by the relentless patter of rain. I pressed on, driven by a singular determination to see the truth revealed. When I finally found a safe spot near a small, secluded roadside, I used the last of my phone's battery to send an anonymous email to the journalist, attaching photos of the monument, the fresh markings, and scanned pages from the diary. It was a gamble, one that might bring justice to the long-forgotten victims and expose the dark underbelly of this region. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of heightened alert. Every creak of the RV, every rustle in the forest made me jump. The email had been sent, but I knew the enforcers would not let this go unpunished. I resolved to keep moving, leaving behind the site of the conspiracy and the ghosts of the past. The RV, despite its many flaws, became my lifeline as I navigated back toward civilization. The journey was grueling, and my mind was heavy with the weight of what I had discovered and the danger that still lurked in the shadows. As I finally emerged onto a well-traveled road, I felt a bittersweet relief. I had escaped with my life, and the evidence was now out in the open, ready to ignite a firestorm of inquiry. However, the scars of my journey ran deep. I had come seeking healing and solitude, but instead I had been thrust into a mystery that revealed not only the dark history of Sabine National Forest, but also the hidden parts of my own soul. Back in town, life resumed its familiar rhythms, but nothing would ever be the same. I found myself haunted by memories of the diary, the stone monument, and the relentless pursuit through the forest. At night, I still heard the whisper of leaves and the echo of distant footsteps. The weight of the evidence I carried with me was both a burden and a beacon, a constant reminder that sometimes the past refuses to remain buried. In the months that followed, the investigative journalist broke the story wide open. Local authorities were forced to confront the decades-long conspiracy, and though many of the perpetrators managed to slip away, the revelations brought about long overdue investigations into the exploitation of indigenous lands and the mysterious disappearances that had plagued the area. The diary, once a forgotten relic, became a symbol of the truth, of a dark chapter in the history of North Louisiana that demanded to be acknowledged. As for me, the journey changed me irrevocably. I learned that healing sometimes comes at a high price, and that the quest for truth can lead you into the most treacherous parts of the human soul. The isolation of the forest had stripped away my defenses and forced me to confront my own inner darkness. In that vast wilderness, I realized that some mysteries are not just hidden in the shadows of ancient trees, but also in the quiet corners of our hearts. I now live with the knowledge that I was a part of something much larger than my own personal struggles, a moment in history where the fight for justice and truth transcended individual pain. My days are quieter now, yet I carry the echoes of Sabine National Forest within me. Every time I pass by a wooded area or hear the rustle of leaves, I remember the lost diary and the secret it held. It serves as a constant reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that sometimes, in the depths of isolation, we find the strength to confront the darkness, both around us and within us. My name is David Reyes, and though I set out on this journey to escape my own demons, I emerged with a deeper understanding of what it means to face the truth. The forest gave me more than solitude. It revealed the cost of silence and the power of uncovering secrets long hidden. And even as I try to rebuild a peaceful life, I know that the whispers of the past will always echo in the back of my mind, a reminder that every journey, no matter how solitary, is part of a larger tapestry woven with pain, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. My name is David. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in the fall of 2023, a time when the fading light of summer was giving way to the long, unsettling nights of early winter. My friends Ethan, Lisa, and I had been planning our RV getaway to Cace Ridge in North Louisiana for months. The idea was simple: escape the suffocating grind of urban life, immerse ourselves in nature, and document local folklore for our shared blog project. I was always the practical one, the skeptic, the planner. Yet nothing in our meticulous preparations could have prepared me for what we were about to face. The drive out to Cace National Forest was uneventful at first. Our old RV rumbled along winding country roads, its interior filled with laughter and the familiar tunes of our favorite songs. Ethan, ever the thrill-seeker, was behind the wheel, a man whose impulsiveness often collided with my need for caution. Lisa, the empathetic heart of our trio, sat quietly in the back, her eyes occasionally drifting to the darkening scenery as if in quiet contemplation. I tried to keep my mind on our project, jotting down notes about local legends and the history of the land. By the time we reached Cace Ridge, dusk was beginning to fall, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. We set up camp at a secluded spot recommended by a local friend who insisted it was steeped in history and untouched by the modern world. The campgrounds were rugged, nestled among towering pines and ancient oaks. It was beautiful in a wild, almost primordial way, yet I couldn't shake an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Our first night in the RV was unsettling right from the start. The vehicle's electrical system began to act up. Flickering lights and a malfunctioning GPS made our comfortable haven seem less reliable. I fumbled with the circuit breakers, trying to bring some semblance of normalcy back to our shelter. Lisa, with her quiet intuition, watched me with worried eyes as if she sensed something beyond a mere technical glitch. Around midnight, as I lay awake listening to the low hum of the RV's engine struggling against the darkness, I heard a soft, eerie whisper outside. It wasn't the wind, but a hushed murmur that seemed to call out our names in a voice that trembled between sorrow and warning. I sat up, heart pounding, and peered through the grimy window. For a moment, I thought I saw a fleeting shadow, a figure draped in a tattered white dress, her face obscured by darkness. The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me questioning whether it was a trick of the light or something far more sinister. Morning brought no relief. The chill in the air had seeped into our bones, and the RV's technical problems persisted, forcing us to rely on a battered map and our memories of the route. Tensions began to rise. Ethan, frustrated by the RV's failures, pushed us to venture further into the forest on foot, insisting that true adventure required us to leave the safety of our metal refuge. Lisa, however, was reluctant. Her soft-spoken pleas for caution fell on deaf ears as Ethan's infectious enthusiasm slowly eroded our collective sense of security. We set out on foot along a narrow, winding trail that led deeper into the forest. The canopy above was dense, and the only sounds were the crunching of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a distant bird. It wasn't long before the forest began to feel alive with a presence that defied explanation. The rustling leaves seemed to whisper secrets, and every shadow appeared to shift with intent. As we trekked through the underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Lisa's unease grew with every step, and even Ethan's bravado seemed to wane under the oppressive atmosphere. It was during one of these moments, when the silence of the forest was broken only by our anxious breaths, that I noticed strange footprints on the damp earth. They were too large and too oddly shaped to belong to any animal I recognized. I knelt down to inspect them, tracing the impressions with my fingertips, and felt a shiver run through me. Something was not right here. We returned to the RV as twilight began its slow descent. In the fading light, the forest took on an even more ominous character. That night, as we gathered around a makeshift campfire outside the RV, hoping the warmth of the flames would drive away the encroaching chill, I saw her again. At the edge of the light, a figure in a white dress stood motionless. Her long, unkempt hair obscured much of her face, but her eyes, when they caught the flickering firelight, seemed to burn with an otherworldly intensity. I called out, but she remained silent, disappearing into the darkness before any of us could approach her. The encounter sent a ripple of fear through our small group. Ethan tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a mere illusion born from our exhaustion and the supernatural allure of our surroundings. But Lisa's face told another story, a mix of dread and recognition, as if she understood far too well the significance of what we had seen. I, for my part, was torn between rational explanations and the growing realization that our peaceful retreat had become the stage for a nightmare. The following day, we attempted to document everything. I set up my camera, determined to capture evidence of the strange occurrences, while Lisa scribbled frantically in her notebook, recording every detail of our experiences. Ethan, ever the adventurer, insisted on exploring deeper into the forest, claiming he could sense something drawing him forward. Against my better judgment, we followed him along a narrow, overgrown trail that led us to a clearing encircled by ancient trees. It was in that clearing that the air grew palpably colder. The temperature drop was sudden and extreme, as if we had stepped into a realm apart from the rest of the world. In the center of the clearing, the ground was disturbed. Trampled earth, broken branches, and a circle of stones that seemed to form some kind of boundary. Lisa's voice trembled as she recounted a local legend of a Native American woman wronged by her people, her spirit doomed to wander the forest in a white dress, seeking retribution for an injustice long past. The story was as old as the land itself, woven into the fabric of local folklore. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I examined the evidence with a growing sense of dread. The footprints from the night before led directly to this clearing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had trespassed on sacred ground. Despite my mounting fear, I couldn't help but be fascinated by the intersection of myth and reality unfolding before us. That night, the atmosphere around our RV was heavy with anticipation and terror. The malfunctioning electrical system had left us in near total darkness, forcing us to rely on the weak glow of our campfire. As the night deepened, the whispering voices returned, now louder and more insistent. They echoed through the trees, their mournful sound mingling with the rustling leaves. I lay awake in the RV, listening to the disembodied voices, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. The climax of our terror came unexpectedly. In the early hours before dawn, as I struggled to drift back to sleep, a violent crash shattered the oppressive silence. I bolted upright to see Ethan's frantic silhouette outside the window. He was pointing wildly at the darkness, his face contorted in a mix of shock and pain. I leapt from my cot, my heart hammering as I rushed out to see what had happened. There, in the clearing near the RV, I found Ethan collapsed on the ground, blood seeping through a gash on his temple. His eyes were wide open, filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. It was clear that whatever had attacked him was not merely a figment of our collective imaginations. Lisa rushed to his side, her voice trembling as she tried to staunch the bleeding, while I searched desperately for any sign of our assailant. In the dim light of the pre-dawn hours, I caught a glimpse of her again, the spectral woman in white. This time, she was closer, her face now clearly visible in the shifting shadows. Her eyes were sorrowful, yet there was an unmistakable malice there. She moved with a languid, haunting grace, as if each step was measured to torment us. The air around her seemed to crackle with a malevolent energy, and I felt as if the very fabric of reality was bending under her gaze. I tried to call out to her, to demand an explanation, but she merely watched me with an expression that mingled regret and fury. In that moment, I understood that she was not a mere passive observer of our misfortune. The legend was true. The spirit of a wronged Native American woman, bound by ancient grief and injustice, was now an active force in our lives. Whether her intentions were to seek retribution or to simply haunt those who disturbed her resting place, one thing was certain: she was dangerous. Lisa's gentle hands trembled as she explained that she had spoken to a local folklorist before our trip, a man who had recounted similar stories of the spirit's violent interventions when sacred lands were disturbed. According to him, the spirit could be appeased through an ancient ritual, one that involved acknowledging her sorrow and offering a gesture of respect. But there was no guarantee that the ritual would work, and worse, there was no promise that Ethan's injuries wouldn't worsen. In the desperate hours that followed, with Ethan's condition deteriorating and the ghost's presence growing ever more ominous, Lisa and I were forced to confront a reality that defied logic. We bundled Ethan into the RV, racing against time to seek help, while the ghost lingered in the periphery, her silent judgment hanging over us like a shroud. Our escape from the forest seemed impossible. The malfunctioning equipment had left us stranded, and the dense woods offered no clear path to civilization. Every rustle, every whisper in the darkness heightened our sense of isolation. I could feel the weight of the spirit's gaze even as we navigated the treacherous trails, her silent presence a constant reminder of the wrong we had unwittingly committed. As we drove, the landscape transformed under the eerie light of a rising sun. The forest, once majestic and inviting, now seemed menacing. a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Lisa's eyes were red from crying, and I could see the fear etched into every line of her face. Ethan lay silent in the back, his condition critical, and I couldn't help but feel that our lives were hanging by a thread. We eventually reached a small, isolated town near Natchitoches, where a local healer claimed to have knowledge of ancient rituals that could soothe vengeful spirits. With little choice left, we followed her advice. In a clearing at the edge of town, beneath the pale light of dawn, the healer instructed us in a ritual of appeasement. We were to lay an offering, a token of respect for the spirit's sorrow, and recite words passed down through generations, words that acknowledge the pain of the past and the sanctity of the land. I remember the moment vividly, my hands shaking as I placed a small, handmade charm, crafted from beads and feathers on the ground. Lisa recited the incantation softly, her voice barely audible over the chirping of early birds, while I could only stand by in helpless vigil. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and for a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Then, as if exhaling a long-held breath, the oppressive energy that had gripped the forest began to ease. The distant, mournful whispers faded into silence, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, we sensed a fragile hope. The ritual did not undo the tragedy that had befallen us. Ethan's injuries were severe, and despite the best efforts of local medics, he slipped away that very day. His loss was a stark, painful reminder of the price we had paid for our intrusion into a realm beyond our understanding. But in his passing, I believe, was a subtle acknowledgement from the spirit, a quiet, sorrowful forgiveness, as if she had taken back a fragment of the pain that had fueled her rage. In the weeks that followed, Lisa and I struggled to come to terms with the events at Cace Ridge. The RV, once our symbol of escape and adventure, had become a mausoleum of memories, each flickering light and malfunctioning circuit a reminder of that harrowing night. I spent many sleepless hours poring over our recordings and notes, trying to piece together a rational explanation for the inexplicable. Yet, the more I examined the evidence, the more I understood that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. I wrote extensively about our ordeal on our blog, detailing every moment, from the early signs of eeriness, the malfunctioning equipment, and the mounting group tensions, to the heart-wrenching final confrontation with the spirit. My writings, raw and unfiltered, struck a chord with many readers who had long suspected that the legends of North Louisiana were more than mere folklore. Through their support and shared stories of similar encounters, I began to realize that the spirit of the wronged Native American woman was not merely an isolated anomaly, but a part of a broader tapestry of grief and retribution that haunted the region. Lisa, too, found solace in her own way. She began studying indigenous traditions and rituals, determined to understand the deeper meanings behind the stories we had encountered. She often said that if we truly respected the land, if we truly listened to its ancient whispers, then perhaps we could learn to coexist with the unseen forces that guarded its secrets. For me, the experience changed everything. I learned that the modern world, with its reliance on technology and logic, can sometimes be ill-equipped to deal with the mysteries of the past. The malfunctioning RV, the eerie voices in the dark, and the vengeful spirit in white, all were reminders that there are realms beyond our control, forces that operate on a different plane of existence. I carry those lessons with me every day, a constant reminder that survival sometimes means embracing the unknown and, at times, accepting loss as a part of life's unpredictable tapestry. Now, whenever I drive past the winding roads near Cace Ridge, I feel a chill that no amount of sunlight can dispel. I see glimpses of that spectral woman, hear echoes of her sorrow in the rustle of the pines, and remember Ethan's wild laughter. A laughter that, for a brief moment, encapsulated the fearless spirit of our youth. But it also reminds me of the cost of curiosity and the price of trespassing on sacred ground. In the quiet moments of reflection, I wonder, was the spirit merely a guardian of the land, enforcing the ancient laws of respect and remembrance? Or was she a tormented soul, forever bound by the injustices of her past, lashing out at those who dared to disturb her eternal vigil? I may never know the full answer. All I know is that I survived that night. And in surviving, I was irrevocably changed. As I pen these words, the memory of that fateful night remains vivid. The flickering lights of our doomed RV, the whispering voices, the chilling sight of a woman in white, and the agonizing loss of my friend Ethan, all are etched into my soul. I share this story not to evoke pity or fear, but to serve as a reminder that in the depths of our modern lives, ancient forces continue to stir. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, we catch a glimpse of a world that exists just beyond our understanding. I walk away from Cace Ridge with a profound sense of respect for the land and its history. A history that is as much about beauty and resilience as it is about sorrow and retribution. And though the scars of that night will always remain, I choose to honor the memory of my friend by living with a deeper awareness of the delicate balance between the seen and unseen. In the end, survival wasn't just about escaping the physical dangers of a haunted forest. It was about facing the darkness within ourselves and emerging, however scarred, with the wisdom to know that some mysteries are meant to remain enshrined in legend. My name is David. I'm 32 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the line between myth and reality is often as thin as the whisper of a ghost on a cold, silent night. My name is Jonas. I'm 40 years old, and this all happened in the fall of 2023, a time when the oppressive heat of the Louisiana summer finally gave way to the damp, chilling embrace of autumn. I was a reclusive writer, haunted by past mistakes and desperate for a fresh start. My old RV had become both my sanctuary and my prison, a vessel for escape from a city life that no longer held any promise for redemption. I set off for a remote bayou near the Atchafalaya Basin, hoping that isolation would spark my creativity and help me come to terms with the guilt I'd long carried. The drive was long and lonesome, punctuated by the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the endless stretch of muddy backroads. I remember glancing at the rearview mirror and thinking how the fading reflections of my past were slowly giving way to something uncertain ahead. When I finally arrived at my destination, I found a secluded campsite tucked away among ancient cypress trees draped in heavy Spanish moss. The spot was near an abandoned shack once used by local fishermen, a decaying relic whose peeling paint and rusted metal whispered of bygone days. I set up camp with deliberate care. The RV, though battered, was my only companion and reminder that I was in control. I arranged my few possessions neatly on a creaking table and lit a small fire outside to ward off the encroaching chill. As darkness fell over the bayou, I couldn't help but feel that I'd crossed an invisible boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The first night was unsettling in small, inexplicable ways. I lay in the cramped bunk of the RV, listening to the distant croaking of frogs and the occasional splash in the murky water beyond the campsite. Then, in the stillness, I began to hear odd sounds, whispers that seemed to drift on the humid air. At first, I dismissed them as the wind playing tricks on my ears. But as the hours passed, the whispers grew clearer, as if they were fragments of voices reciting something in a language I couldn't understand. I stepped outside and squinted into the darkness. The silhouettes of the cypress trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying slowly. That's when I noticed it, a strange symbol carved into the rough bark of one of the trees. It was unlike any mark I'd seen before, a series of interlocking spirals and lines that radiated an eerie sense of purpose. My heart pounded as I ran my fingers over the rough engraving, feeling an inexplicable chill. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unwittingly trespassed into a place where ancient forces still held sway. The next day, I decided to explore the area around the abandoned shack. I wandered slowly along a narrow, muddy trail, my notebook clutched tightly in one hand. The bayou was breathtaking in its wildness. Sunlight filtered through thick layers of moss, and the stagnant water reflected the overhanging trees like a murky mirror. As I pushed open the creaking door of the shack, a musty smell and the creak of old wood greeted me. Inside, scattered among the remnants of long-forgotten belongings, I discovered an old, tattered diary. The diary's pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was shaky but determined. I spent hours poring over the diary's entries, each page revealing fragments of a tragic tale. It told the story of a voodoo witch, a woman once revered for her healing powers, but betrayed by her own community. In a fit of fear and superstition, her people had condemned her to death, and her vengeful spirit was said to have cursed the land ever since. The diary hinted that her spirit was not a mindless force, but one fueled by sorrow and the deep-seated injustice of her demise. What struck me most was a recurring theme. The witch's anger was awakened in those who carried personal guilt, a mirror to the burdens I had been shouldering for years. That evening, back at the RV, I tried to shake off a growing sense of dread. I fired up my laptop and began to type, hoping that words might expel the unease building inside me. But as night fell, the bayou seemed to come alive in ways that defied explanation. The wind carried the faint sound of rhythmic chanting, echoing across the water. I glanced out the window and thought I saw a figure moving slowly among the trees, a dark, hooded shape that vanished as soon as I tried to focus. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with feverish dreams of dark rituals and sorrowful faces. On the third day, while taking a solitary walk along a narrow path that skirted a stagnant pool of water, I encountered a man. He appeared almost as if he had stepped out of the bayou itself. A rugged, weathered figure whose eyes held the secrets of the swamp. He introduced himself as Caleb. His voice was soft yet firm, and his presence radiated a quiet strength born of years spent living off the grid. Caleb listened intently as I recounted my experiences over the past few days. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the dense trees that encircled us. "You're not the first to feel her pull," he said in a low, measured tone. "The spirit, she's not just a legend. She's been watching over this land for centuries, and lately, she's taken notice of those burdened with guilt. She finds in them a mirror of her own despair." Caleb's words sent a shiver down my spine. I had felt her presence, sensed the weight of a sorrow that wasn't entirely my own. Over the next few hours, Caleb showed me around the bayou, pointing out other subtle signs of the witch's lingering power. A circle of stones arranged in a precise pattern beneath a gnarled oak, symbols etched into the mud along the water's edge, and even the mournful wail of the wind that sometimes sounded almost like a lament. As night fell again, the bayou transformed into a realm of deep shadows and muted whispers. I returned to the RV, determined to continue my writing, yet every creak of the metal structure and every rustle of the leaves outside amplified my growing unease. That night, the supernatural occurrences escalated. I awoke to the sound of footsteps circling the RV, accompanied by a low, mournful chant. Peering through the small window, I saw a spectral figure emerging from the darkness. A hooded woman, her face hidden beneath a tattered veil, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, and then she turned and vanished into the night, as if carried away by the wind. The terror of that encounter left me sleepless and trembling. I clutched the diary and Caleb's cryptic words in my mind. The witch's spirit was drawn to those burdened with guilt. All my past mistakes, the relationships ruined, the opportunities squandered, the moments of selfishness, seemed to converge in that solitary moment. I began to question whether I was truly prepared for the confrontation that seemed inevitable. Over the following days, the bayou grew increasingly hostile. I felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The chants in the wind became louder, more insistent. In my restless state, I found that my dreams were now filled with vivid images of a woman in a hooded cloak, performing dark rituals under the light of a waning moon. The dreams were so real that, upon waking, I would feel a deep, unshakable sorrow that wasn't entirely mine. One stormy night, when the bayou's inky darkness was broken only by the erratic flash of lightning, the supernatural forces reached their peak. The RV shuddered as the thunder rolled across the sky, and the wind howled like a chorus of tormented souls. I sat huddled near the small campfire outside, the rain lashing against the metal roof, and the oppressive presence of the bayou pressing in on all sides. It was then that she appeared again, in full fury. The spectral witch materialized before me, her form illuminated intermittently by the jagged bolts of lightning. No longer a vague, hooded figure, she now stood with a terrifying clarity. Her eyes burned with a mix of sorrow and wrath, and her presence radiated an aura of unbridled power. The storm seemed to bend around her as if nature itself recognized her dominion. I stood frozen, paralyzed by a terror I could not fully comprehend. The witch's gaze swept over me, and in that moment, I felt every ounce of guilt, every regret I had tried so desperately to bury, come crashing back. The wind carried a voice that was both gentle and merciless, as if it spoke directly to the deepest parts of my soul. You have wronged, and now you must atone. The shock of her words was almost too much to bear. I tried to speak, to plead for mercy, but my voice was swallowed by the cacophony of the storm. The supernatural force in front of me surged forward, and for a moment I believed that I would be consumed by the same darkness that had claimed so many lives before me. In that harrowing moment, I remembered the diary and a particular entry that had caught my attention, a passage that hinted at an ancient prayer, a ritual of contrition that might appease the witch's vengeful spirit. With trembling hands and a mind teetering on the brink of despair, I fumbled through the pages until I found the passage. The prayer was archaic, its words a mix of broken French and Creole, yet they carried a solemn power that resonated deep within me. With the storm raging around me and the spectral figure looming ever closer, I began to recite the prayer. My voice was raw and uncertain at first, but as the words spilled out into the tumultuous night, I felt something shift in the air. It was as if the very fabric of the bayou trembled in response. The witch's fury seemed to wane, replaced by a mournful resignation. Her eyes, once filled with seething anger, now shimmered with a profound sadness, as though she too was trapped in the cycle of endless remorse. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there in that torrential downpour, my voice echoing against the roar of the wind. When at last I finished the prayer, the bayou fell into a heavy silence. The storm's fury diminished, and the oppressive presence that had weighed on me for days lifted ever so slightly. The spectral witch lingered for a moment longer, her form flickering like a fading candle, and then she slowly dissolved into the night, leaving behind nothing but the soft rustling of the leaves. In the aftermath of that night, I felt both physically and emotionally drained. The terror I had experienced was seared into my memory, yet it had also brought me to a long overdue reckoning with my own past. I spent the following days in a reflective haze, watching the bayou slowly return to its quiet, eerie normalcy. I resumed my writing, but the words that flowed now were imbued with a new depth, a raw honesty born of pain, guilt, and a tentative hope for redemption. Caleb visited me one morning, emerging from the mist like a silent guardian. His presence was reassuring, and together we sat on the worn steps of the abandoned shack. He shared with me stories of the bayou's past, of the witch whose spirit had been twisted by betrayal and injustice. He explained that her wrath was not arbitrary, but a reflection of the unresolved grievances of those who had suffered deeply. In a way, her spirit was a mirror to my own inner turmoil, a reminder that the scars of the past could not be ignored. With Caleb's quiet wisdom and my own hard-won lessons, I began to document every detail of my experience. I poured my heart into a manuscript, blending the raw, eerie beauty of the bayou with the bitter truth of my personal failings. Each word was a step toward absolution, a way of acknowledging the darkness within me while also embracing the possibility of forgiveness. I left the bayou a changed man. The isolation that had once seemed like a means of escape became, instead, a crucible in which I forged a new understanding of myself. I had faced not only a supernatural force beyond comprehension, but also the relentless judgment of my own conscience. In that confrontation, I found the courage to accept responsibility for my past and to begin the slow, painful process of healing. Even now, as I look back on that tumultuous period of my life, I am struck by the bittersweet clarity that emerged from the darkness. The bayou, with all its haunting beauty and hidden terrors, had taught me that redemption was not a destination but a journey marked by moments of raw, unfiltered truth. The ghost of the witch, once a terrifying symbol of retribution, had ultimately become a catalyst for my transformation. I continue to write now with a deeper respect for the delicate balance between human frailty and the ancient forces that govern our world. The manuscript I completed in the aftermath of that stormy night remains one of my most personal works, a chronicle of a solitary man's descent into darkness and the slow, painful ascent toward forgiveness. Whenever I travel now, I am reminded of the bayou's silent, watchful presence. The memory of that storm, the spectral figure in the downpour, and the echo of the ancient prayer linger with me like a half-remembered dream. And though I strive to leave the past behind, I carry with me the lesson that true redemption comes not from running away, but from confronting the shadows within and daring to speak words of contrition even when the darkness seems overwhelming. My name is Jonas, and I am 40 years old. I left the city burdened with guilt and a shattered sense of purpose, only to find in the heart of the Louisiana bayou a mirror reflecting my own despair and ultimately the fragile possibility of forgiveness. That journey into isolation, steeped in supernatural encounters and personal reckonings, changed everything. It taught me that sometimes the most terrifying specters are the ones we harbor inside ourselves, and that the path to redemption is paved with the courage to face them head-on, no matter how relentless the storm may be. My name is Samantha Rodriguez. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of the weekend that changed everything at Red River Bend. It started as a much-needed escape from the relentless chaos of Shreveport. I'd been feeling the pressure mounting, work deadlines, relentless city noise, and the creeping sense that life was slipping by in an endless loop of monotony. So, when my friends Marcus, Tanya, and Jake suggested a weekend RV trip into North Louisiana's backwoods, I jumped at the chance. I was determined to prove to myself that I could lead, organize, and navigate even the most unpredictable circumstances. Our plan was simple. Spend a few days camping by the banks of the Red River, explore remote trails, and even visit an abandoned plantation rumored to be steeped in history and secrets. We loaded up the old RV with all our gear, tent, food supplies, extra fuel, and set out with a mix of excitement and a touch of apprehension. Marcus, ever the risk-taker, was buzzing with adrenaline about the adventure ahead. Tanya, who'd always had an uncanny sensitivity to things beyond the ordinary, was quiet and thoughtful, while Jake maintained his usual skeptical humor, making light of every minor setback. The journey began uneventfully. Our spirits were high as we cruised down dusty back roads lined with sprawling cypress trees and moss-draped oaks. However, things took an unexpected turn shortly after we reached our first stop, a small weathered diner on the outskirts of a rural town. Over a cup of strong black coffee, an old local with a face etched by years of hard living leaned in and told us the legend of the rugaru, a beast from Cajun folklore, said to be a cursed soul turned into a monstrous creature that prowls the Louisiana backwoods at night. His voice, gruff and laden with sorrow, warned us to respect the ancient ways and never venture too deep into the wilderness once darkness fell. I dismissed his tale as local color at first, but something in his eyes made me pause, a deep, unspoken warning that felt all too real. That night, after arriving at our chosen campsite near a narrow bend in the Red River, we encountered our first challenges. The RV, our home for the weekend, began sputtering as soon as the engine started. I spent the early hours under its hood, frustrated by faulty wiring and a missing spark plug. Our basic camping gear wasn't any better. A critical tent pole snapped during setup, and our flashlight flickered ominously. These technical glitches, while maddening, were easy to explain until the night deepened. It was well past midnight when I finally found a moment of solitude by the dying embers of our campfire. The night was unusually silent for a Louisiana forest. I could feel the humidity pressing against my skin, and the distant, steady murmur of the river set a calm backdrop. But then, as I sat there with my thoughts swirling, I noticed something strange. The trees around our camp bore odd, deliberate carvings. Symbols I couldn't decipher, etched deeply into the bark, glowed faintly in the firelight. I recalled the local lore, the very same that spoke of a cursed creature. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way back to the RV, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the oppressive darkness. The next morning, tensions were high. Marcus was already complaining about the delays caused by the RV's engine troubles. Jake, ever the cynic, rolled his eyes at what he called local ghost stories, when Tanya voiced her concern about the eerie carvings. Tanya's eyes, usually so gentle and expressive, were clouded with a kind of foreboding I hadn't seen before. I tried to reassure everyone that our problems were merely mechanical and natural. The RV could be fixed, and the carvings were probably nothing more than the work of local teenagers with a penchant for pranks. But deep down, I felt that the quiet horror of that night was only a precursor to something much darker. By late afternoon, we had set out to explore a little-known trail that wound its way deeper into the wilderness. The path was narrow, lined with ancient trees whose branches interlocked overhead to form a natural archway that dimmed the sunlight. As we ventured further, the trail became increasingly overgrown and isolated. The air turned still, and an uncanny chill crept up our spines even under the warm Louisiana sun. I found myself glancing back at the RV, feeling as though it were a safe haven we might never see again if we didn't hurry back. It wasn't long before we first encountered something inexplicable. As we crossed a small clearing, a low, guttural growl rumbled from the dense thicket. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat, and looked around for the source. Marcus, ever impulsive, bolted toward the noise, insisting that it was nothing but a wild animal. But Tanya grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with terror, whispering, "It's not an animal. It's something else." I could see the conflict in Jake's eyes, skepticism clashing with the primal instinct to run. We pressed on, but the forest itself seemed to grow hostile. Shadows danced unnaturally among the trees, and the carvings we'd seen at the campsite appeared again on tree trunks along the trail. Every snap of a twig and rustle in the underbrush was amplified by our heightened senses. At one point, we reached a small clearing by a stagnant pond, and for a split second, I caught a glimpse of a pale, ghostly face in the water's reflection. The face was sorrowful, almost pleading, and it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me breathless. Nightfall brought with it a suffocating darkness and an oppressive silence that belied the underlying tension. We returned to our campsite, only to discover that our RV had been ransacked. Personal belongings were strewn about, and the engine compartment looked as if someone or something had tampered with the wires. I immediately suspected that whatever had been stalking us in the woods had taken a keen interest in our camp. That night, as we huddled inside the dim RV, every creak and groan of the structure set us on edge. In the dead of night, I was awoken by the unmistakable sound of scraping metal and whispered voices outside. I crept to the window and peered into the inky blackness. There, moving silently between the trees, was a figure that defied explanation. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that shone like embers in the darkness. For a moment I thought of the rugaru, a creature of myth that the local diner keeper had mentioned. The figure paused, as if sensing my gaze, and then melted into the shadows. I could feel the malignant energy in its presence, a cold, predatory focus that sent shivers down my spine. The next morning, we convened in the RV to discuss what had happened. Marcus was livid. He argued that our misfortunes were the result of our own carelessness. Jake maintained his skepticism, though even he couldn't ignore the strange marks on the trees that we all had seen. Tanya, with a trembling voice, recounted her dreams from the previous night. Vivid nightmares of a creature stalking her through endless darkness. In the midst of these heated debates, I found myself caught between my own rationality and the undeniable evidence that something supernatural was at play. Determined to confront the threat rather than cower in fear, I proposed that we fortify our position and seek answers in the local lore. We scoured the area for any signs of the creature's lair, following the symbols carved into the trees that seemed to form a crude map. The journey led us deeper into the forest, toward an ancient clearing rumored to be the heart of the rugaru's domain. The atmosphere grew oppressive, as though the forest itself were warning us to turn back, but we pressed on, driven by a mix of desperation and curiosity. That evening, as twilight bled into night, we arrived at a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a circle of standing stones. The stones were covered in moss and strange archaic symbols that pulsed faintly under the moonlight. Tanya, who had been studying the local legends, recognized them as protective sigils, rituals meant to ward off evil. She explained that these symbols were part of a tradition passed down by indigenous peoples and early settlers, a desperate attempt to keep malevolent forces at bay. It was in that circle of stones that we finally came face to face with the rugaru. The creature emerged silently from the shadows, its form shifting between that of a man and a beast. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, unholy light, and its growl was a sound of pure malice. Marcus impulsively lunged forward with a makeshift weapon, a sharpened piece of metal he had fashioned from debris. The creature dodged effortlessly, its movements fluid and predatory. In the ensuing chaos, it attacked with brutal force, sending Marcus sprawling to the ground. I rushed to his side, panic surging through me, Jake and Tanya joined in, and we fought desperately to fend off the creature. I remember the fear and adrenaline surging through my veins as I struggled to maintain control of the situation. In those frantic moments, our earlier disagreements melted away. We were united by the singular need to survive. I managed to shove the creature back, but not before it left deep, vicious gashes on Marcus's arm. The battle waged on for what felt like an eternity. The rugaru was relentless, its attacks unpredictable and deadly. At one point, it circled around us, watching silently as if it were testing our resolve. The creature's dual nature, part human, part beast, made it all the more terrifying. There were moments when it seemed almost contemplative, as if it were mourning the curse that bound it to this fate. But those moments of hesitation only gave us a brief respite before it surged back into violence. In the aftermath of the encounter, we retreated to the safety of our RV, our minds racing with a cocktail of relief and horror. Marcus's wound was severe, and we had no choice but to improvise a makeshift bandage with what little we had. The RV, once a symbol of freedom and escape, now felt like a fragile fortress in a world gone mad. Throughout that long, sleepless night, every sound, whether the creaking of the RV or the whisper of the wind, seemed laden with the threat of another attack. The following morning, we found signs that the creature had not abandoned its pursuit. Tracks around the RV were fresh, and more carvings had appeared on nearby trees, this time accompanied by crude, hastily scrawled warnings in a language none of us could decipher. My heart sank as I realized that our ordeal was far from over. The forest was alive with the malevolent presence of the rugaru, a relentless force that blurred the line between myth and reality. Desperation forced us to take drastic measures. Tanya, drawing on the lore she had studied, suggested that we perform a protective ritual using the symbols we'd seen around the forest. Despite Jake's grumbling skepticism, we agreed that we had nothing to lose. We gathered what little natural ingredients we could find, herbs, water from a nearby stream, and even a few personal items imbued with our own energy, and set up a small altar in the clearing of standing stones. As we chanted the protective incantations, I felt a surge of determination. In that moment, I was not just fighting for my own life, but for the souls of all of us, and perhaps for the tormented spirit of the creature itself. The air round us grew thick, and a palpable energy rippled through the clearing. For a fleeting moment, the rugaru paused at the edge of the stones, its eyes locking with mine. There was a spark of recognition, or perhaps remorse, in those fiery depths. But before any further understanding could be reached, the creature let out a guttural cry and charged at us, its form shifting wildly in a display of ferocity that left us scrambling for cover. The ensuing chaos was a blur of screams, desperate shouts, and the crashing of limbs against stone. In the melee, Marcus was separated from the group, and I could only hear his panicked calls echoing through the forest. Instinctively, I broke from the protective circle and dashed toward his voice, my heart pounding in my ears. Every step was a struggle against both the physical terrain and the paralyzing fear that threatened to engulf me. The forest seemed to conspire against me, branches whipping at my face and roots tangling my feet. I eventually found Marcus near a fallen log, his arm bleeding profusely and his face contorted in pain. "Sam!" he gasped. "It's coming back! I can hear it!" His voice was weak, the terror in his eyes mirroring my own. I gathered him in my arms, feeling both the weight of his pain and the urgency of our situation. With him supported against my back, I sprinted back toward the RV, every shadow and rustle in the undergrowth a potential harbinger of doom. Back at the RV, as Jake and Tanya secured the perimeter, I managed to stabilize Marcus with what little medical supplies we had. The temporary calm that settled over us was deceptive. a fragile lull in the relentless storm of horror. We knew the creature was still out there, lurking in the darkness, its intentions as enigmatic as they were deadly. In the quiet hours before dawn, as I sat by the battered window of the RV, I reflected on the cruel irony of our situation. We had set out seeking adventure, a brief respite from the confines of modern life, only to find ourselves entangled in a battle against an ancient evil. The rugaru, a creature born of old curses and whispered legends, was not merely a figment of folklore. It was a force of nature, both violent and tragic, a living reminder of the dangers that lurk when man dares to disturb the secrets of the past. That day, we made a difficult decision. With Marcus in critical condition and our supplies dwindling, we resolved to leave the forest and seek help at the nearest town. The journey back was a somber one, each of us lost in our thoughts and the weight of our near-death experience. The forest, with its silent witnesses, the ancient trees and the lingering symbols, seemed to watch us go, as if mourning the lives lost and the innocence shattered by its dark heart. Weeks have passed since that fateful weekend, but the memories remain indelibly etched in my mind. I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the echoes of that creature's guttural cry reverberating in my ears. Marcus eventually recovered, though the scars on his arm and in his soul are a permanent reminder of that night. Jake's skepticism has given way to a cautious respect for the unknown, and Tanya continues to study the lore, determined to understand the ancient forces that inhabit our world. Looking back, I realize that our ordeal was not simply a battle for survival against a supernatural predator. It was a confrontation with the fragile boundary between myth and reality. The rugaru was both a literal threat and a symbol of the ancient, untamed power that resides in the wilderness of North Louisiana. In our modern lives, we often dismiss such legends as mere stories, but in the depths of the backwoods, those legends come alive, exacting a terrible toll on those who dare to challenge them. I tell this story now, not only to remember those harrowing days, but also as a warning. The wilderness holds secrets that defy our understanding, and sometimes the price of venturing too far from the comforts of civilization is far too high. As I sit here in relative safety, the memory of the rugaru's glowing eyes and the echoes of its cry still haunt me, a chilling reminder that in the quiet corners of our world, ancient horrors still lurk, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their domain. In the end, our story at Red River Bend became a testament to the strength of friendship, the resilience of the human spirit, and the sobering realization that some mysteries of the past are best left undisturbed. My name is Samantha Rodriguez, and I am forever changed by that night. A night when legends became reality, and survival meant facing down the embodiment of our deepest, most primal fears. My name is Jack Thompson. I'm 42 years old, and this happened in the summer of 2023 when I sought refuge from my past at Cace River Bluff in North Louisiana. I was a former military man, burdened with regrets and memories that haunted me day and night. I craved solitude, a place where I could come face to face with my inner demons and perhaps find some semblance of redemption. The idea of an RV camping trip, all alone with nature as my only companion, seemed like the perfect escape. I had purchased an old RV on a whim, a creaky, time-worn vehicle that had seen better days. The engine sputtered on occasion, and the interior was riddled with the remnants of its long-forgotten life. But I didn't mind. I welcomed the imperfections as part of the journey. I packed a few personal belongings, some basic supplies, and a stack of paper maps, knowing that my outdated navigation systems and malfunctioning communication devices would force me to rely on old-fashioned instincts and local hints. The drive to Cace River Bluff was a solitary one, marked by long stretches of empty roads, bordered by dense woods and the slow-moving course of the Cace River. The landscape was raw and untamed, bathed in the hazy heat of late summer. As I approached the bluff, I couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was whispering secrets, a murmur that promised hidden truths and buried histories. After settling into a modest campsite on a rocky outcrop overlooking the river, I began to explore the immediate surroundings. The RV's interior was cluttered with dust and the faint odor of old upholstery, but it provided a sanctuary against the oppressive heat. I set up my small camp and took a moment to appreciate the panoramic view of the river meandering through the wilderness below. The isolation was both a comfort and a reminder of everything I had left behind. That night, as I sat alone listening to the chorus of crickets and the gentle rush of the river, I decided to do a thorough inspection of the RV. It was during this routine check that I discovered something that would shatter the fragile calm I'd worked so hard to attain. A faded, leather-bound journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the storage compartment. The journal was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, and the handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. Scrawled across its margins were cryptic entries, hand-drawn maps of the local area, and sketches of landmarks that I recognized from the landscape around me. I spent the rest of the night poring over the journal by the dim light of a lantern. The entries hinted at a long-forgotten environmental cover-up, one that involved corrupt dealings and the exploitation of the very land I now inhabited. Names of local families, references to hidden covenants, and warnings written in a trembling hand populated the pages. One passage in particular caught my eye. Beware the guardians of Cace River Bluff. They protect the secrets at all costs. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel that the journal was meant for someone else. A warning left behind by someone who had paid a steep price for their curiosity. In the following days, I began to notice more oddities around the campsite. On one of my early morning walks, I came upon trees marked with strange, deliberate carvings. The symbols were reminiscent of those in the journal, intricate and archaic, as if meant to ward off evil or to signal a clandestine boundary. I couldn't tell if they were the work of local pranksters or something far more sinister. The unsettling feeling that I was being watched never left me, and as the day progressed, the forest seemed to close in around my RV like a suffocating embrace. I decided to visit the nearest town for supplies and perhaps some answers. The town was small, its population dwindled by time and hardship. I stopped at a tiny general store where I encountered Miss Evelyn, a weathered woman with deep-set eyes that held years of untold stories. Over a cup of weak coffee, I mentioned my presence at Cace River Bluff and casually alluded to the journal I'd found. Her eyes darkened as she listened, and after a long pause, she said in a hushed tone, "You shouldn't be meddling in what you don't understand, Mr. Thompson. This land has secrets, and those secrets are guarded fiercely. Some things are better left buried." Her words, though measured, carried an undercurrent of dire warning. I tried to press her for more details, but she only shook her head, muttering, "I've seen what happens to those who seek the truth here." I left the store with more questions than answers, and an inexplicable sense of dread began to cloud my thoughts. Back at the RV, equipment failures compounded my growing anxiety. The power supply flickered sporadically, leaving me in bouts of darkness even during the day. I resorted to using paper maps and the directions given by reluctant locals, each conversation adding to the mounting tension. The isolation I had once craved now felt oppressive, a reminder that I was utterly alone with forces beyond my understanding. That first storm came suddenly. The skies darkened with heavy, brooding clouds, and a fierce wind whipped across the bluff. I secured the RV as best as I could, but the tempest was relentless. Rain pounded the roof in an incessant barrage, and lightning illuminated the dense forest in sporadic flashes. I huddled inside the RV, the howling wind and the creaking metal melding into a cacophony of fear. In the midst of the storm, I could have sworn I heard distant, hushed voices carried by the wind, voices that seemed to murmur warnings and curses in equal measure. As the storm raged on, I felt a strange compulsion to leave the RV and seek shelter beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak. With only a flashlight in hand, I ventured out into the driving rain. The wind was so strong that it nearly tore the flashlight from my grip, and I fought against the force of nature to make my way toward the tree. Once beneath its sprawling canopy, I found a moment of eerie stillness. The rain softened, and in that brief respite, I noticed something even more disturbing. A series of symbols etched into the bark of the oak, identical to those I had seen near the RV and in the journal. My heart pounded as I traced my fingers over the rough carvings, each mark a silent testament to secrets that had long been concealed. The next morning, after the storm had passed, I resumed my investigation of the journal and the surrounding area. I retraced the maps and notes scribbled in its pages, seeking any clue that might explain the carvings, the whispered voices, and the overwhelming sense of being drawn into a web of hidden truths. I began to piece together a story of environmental exploitation. A powerful entity had once conspired to cover up the ravages inflicted upon the land. In return for their silence, a group of locals had taken on the role of guardians, ensuring that no outsider would disturb the delicate balance of the secrets buried here. It was during one of these solitary explorations that I encountered a shadow moving among the trees. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but as I watched, the figure became more defined. A man, clad in dark clothing, moving with an unsettling purpose. I followed at a safe distance, my military instincts kicking in, every sense on high alert. The figure led me to a secluded part of the bluff where the ground was scarred by old construction and hidden clearings. There, amidst the overgrowth, I saw remnants of a long-abandoned structure, a building that seemed to serve as a clandestine meeting place. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this the secret meeting place of the Guardians? Had they orchestrated the environmental cover-up, and were they now protecting it with lethal determination? As I approached the structure, the wind picked up, and I heard a low guttural murmur that seemed to emanate from the very earth. I pressed on, driven by a mix of trepidation and a desperate need for answers. Inside the dilapidated building, I found evidence of recent activity, discarded items, footprints in the dust, and scraps of paper with markings similar to those in the journal. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was not alone, and I had unwittingly become entangled in a conspiracy that reached far deeper than I had imagined. The guardians of Cace River Bluff were real, and they would do whatever it took to keep their secrets hidden. That night, as I returned to the RV with my heart pounding and my thoughts in disarray, I felt the oppressive weight of isolation intensify. The wind whispered through the trees as if recounting the saga of the land, and every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat. I could no longer dismiss the feeling that I was being hunted, not by nature but by men determined to silence any intruder. In the dead of night, with darkness cloaking everything in inky black, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps on the roof of the RV. My pulse hammered in my ears as I peered out of a small window, straining to see in the gloom. For a long, agonizing moment, I saw nothing but the impenetrable darkness of the forest. Then, faintly, I discerned a figure at the edge of the clearing. A man watching intently. I couldn't tell if it was one of the guardians or a desperate trespasser. Whatever the case, the presence was enough to shatter the remnants of my fragile calm. The next morning, as the sun crept over the horizon and began to dispel the lingering darkness, I resolved that I had to confront this mystery head-on. My mind was a battleground of conflicting emotions. The desire for redemption, the need to unearth the truth, and the overwhelming instinct to survive. I took a deep breath, gathered my meager supplies, and set out toward the edge of the bluff where I had last seen the mysterious figure. The journey to the precipice was arduous. The remnants of the storm had left the paths slick and treacherous. Every step felt like wading through a mire of uncertainty. I clutched the journal tightly, its cryptic words a constant reminder of the secrets that had ensnared me. As I neared the edge of the bluff, the wind howled like a chorus of tortured souls, and I sensed that I was on the verge of a confrontation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about this land and about myself. There, amid the swirling mists and relentless gusts, I encountered the vigilante. He emerged from the shadows with a deliberate, predatory gait, his eyes glinting with a cold determination. His presence was commanding, almost spectral in the harsh light of dawn. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. We stared at each other in silence, a silent duel between a man driven by the ghosts of his past and a guardian sworn to protect a dark, hidden truth. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This land isn't for the likes of you." I steadied my voice, refusing to let fear consume me. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I found a journal, and I need to know what's been hidden here. Who are you?" His eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward. "I'm the keeper of Cace River Bluff, and if you value your life, you'll leave before you disturb what should remain undisturbed." The words sent a chill through me. I realized that the vigilante wasn't just a random trespasser. He was a man tasked with guarding secrets, and his methods were as ruthless as they were unwavering. Our conversation spiraled into a tense standoff, the wind roaring around us like an ancient judgment. I explained my search for redemption, my desperate need to come to terms with my past, and my desire to understand the hidden history of the land. Yet his gaze remained steely, unmoved by my pleas. In that moment, I understood that the true confrontation was not merely between two individuals, but between the forces of secrecy and the relentless quest for truth. The vigilante lunged suddenly, and in a flash of movement our clash became a physical struggle, a desperate, chaotic battle in the midst of a storm. The sound of our scuffle was drowned out by the howling wind, each of us driven by forces we could scarcely comprehend. For what felt like an eternity, we grappled on the rain-soaked ground, the cold water mixing with sweat and determination. In the struggle, I felt the weight of my past, each regret and scar fueling my resolve. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to break free and in a moment of raw vulnerability shouted, "I'm not your enemy. I'm here because I need answers." The vigilante paused, his expression torn between fury and uncertainty. For a brief, heart-stopping second, the storm seemed to hold its breath, and I caught a glimpse of sorrow in his eyes, a flicker of a man who had once known pain and loss. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the struggle ended. The vigilante stepped back, defeated not by force but by the undeniable truth in my words. "You have a choice," he said, voice barely audible over the wind. "Walk away now, or learn the truth and bear its weight." I knew then that there was no turning back. The secrets of Cace River Bluff had claimed me, and my search for redemption would now intertwine with the dark history of this land. I returned to my RV with the vigilante's warning echoing in my mind. That day, I spent hours poring over the journal, the carved symbols, and the scraps of evidence I had collected. I reached out to a few trusted contacts, piecing together fragments of a conspiracy that stretched back decades. A cover-up of environmental devastation, a pact between corrupt powers and desperate locals, and the emergence of guardians willing to sacrifice everything to keep the truth hidden. The final days of my solitary sojourn were a blur of sleepless nights, frantic research, and an ever-present dread that the vigilante, or worse, his cohorts, might return to silence me permanently. I knew that if I was to survive and find redemption, I had to expose the hidden truth of Cace River bluff. With each passing day, the isolation gnawed at my sanity, yet I pressed on, driven by the conviction that uncovering the past might somehow heal the wounds of my own history. I left the bluff with a heavy heart, the weight of untold secrets and unresolved conflicts trailing behind me. The journey home was marked by moments of introspection, flashbacks of both my military past and the harrowing confrontation on the bluff. I carried the journal with me as a talisman and a reminder that some truths are too dangerous to ignore. Now, months later, I find myself sitting in a modest apartment in a quieter part of Louisiana, still haunted by the echoes of that fateful summer. The secrets of Cace River bluff continue to lurk in the recesses of my mind, a constant reminder that redemption is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the harsh realities of a corrupt world. I have since begun writing down my experiences, determined to expose the truth and honor the voices of those who were silenced by fear. I share this story not as a tale of victory or resolution, but as a cautionary account, a reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that sometimes the quest for redemption leads us into the darkest corners of our soul and the wilderness alike. I learned that in confronting the hidden guardians of Cace River bluff, I was not only battling external forces, but also the inner demons that had driven me to seek solitude in the first place. My name is Jack Thompson, and this journey changed me forever. In the silence of that isolated bluff, amid the raging storms and whispered secrets, I discovered that the truth, however painful, is the only path to redemption. And though the scars may never fully fade, I now understand that facing the darkness, both outside and within, is the only way to emerge into the light. My name is John. I'm 35 years old, and this happened one fateful autumn in North Louisiana, a time when the veil between the natural and the supernatural seemed frighteningly thin. I'd always been the practical one among my friends, the de facto leader. I prided myself on keeping a level head, especially when things went awry. So when Sarah, Marcus, Anna, and I planned an RV camping trip near Mystic Bayou, adjacent to the dense woodlands of Cace Ridge National Forest, I believed we were in for a relaxing weekend getaway. We'd all been craving an escape from the urban grind, and the idea of reconnecting with nature, stargazing and sharing ghost stories around a campfire was too tempting to pass up. We set off early on a crisp October morning. The air was brisk, the sky a perfect blue, and our spirits high. I'd spent extra time the night before checking our RV's systems, though I couldn't shake a nagging worry about the aged equipment. Our RV, a trusty but weathered vehicle, had been showing signs of wear lately. A faulty GPS, a radio that sometimes caught mysterious static, and an engine that coughed more than it roared. But we were determined. Nothing could spoil our adventure. As we drove along the winding roads of North Louisiana, our conversation turned to local legends. Sarah, ever the adventurer, recounted stories of ghostly apparitions and mysterious cults said to inhabit the bayou. Marcus, the skeptic, scoffed at every tale, insisting there was a rational explanation for every eerie occurrence. Anna, quiet but perceptive, listened intently, occasionally interjecting with thoughtful observations that hinted at a deeper understanding of the world's hidden currents. I found myself trying to balance these differing viewpoints, ensuring our excitement didn't give way to discord. We arrived at Mystic Bayou by late afternoon. The bayou itself was a hauntingly beautiful sight, an expanse of dark, slow-moving water bordered by ancient cypress trees draped in moss. The RV was parked at a small clearing, surrounded by dense underbrush and towering trees. I could feel the weight of history and mystery in the air, as if the land itself was whispering secrets of the past. Our first night started with a sense of camaraderie as we set up a small campfire outside the RV. The evening was filled with laughter, playful banter, and the sharing of ghost stories. But even as the flames danced and the night deepened, an unsettling tension hovered in the background. It wasn't long before our RV's radio began to crackle with strange static, punctuated by whispers that sounded almost like voices. A chorus of indistinct words that sent shivers down my spine. I dismissed it as interference, though deep down, I couldn't ignore the chill that crept over me. The first real sign that something wasn't right came later that night. I was lying in the RV, trying to sleep despite the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, when I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping against the window. I sat up, heart pounding, and peered into the darkness. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the beam of the streetlight. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Morning brought little relief. Our faulty GPS had led us off the main road and into a thicket of trees, forcing us to navigate a narrow, twisting trail that seemed to have been forgotten by time. As we trudged along the rugged path, our earlier excitement was replaced by a growing sense of disquiet. Anna was the first to speak up, her voice trembling as she pointed to strange, cryptic symbols carved into the bark of an old oak tree. They resembled indigenous markings, perhaps remnants of ancient rituals or warnings, left by those who once revered the bayou's dark powers. "Do you think these mean something?" she asked softly, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and fear. Marcus snorted. "It's just some prank or vandalism," he said dismissively, though even his tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Sarah, ever impulsive, had already begun to examine the carvings up close, her fingers tracing the intricate lines as if trying to unlock their secret. I couldn't help but feel that the very earth beneath us was alive with unspoken menace. That evening, as dusk settled over the bayou, we decided to set up camp in a clearing a short distance from the RV. The clearing was eerily silent except for the distant call of a lone owl and the whisper of the wind through the trees. It wasn't long before the atmosphere shifted from simply eerie to downright malevolent. While we sat around a small campfire, the RV's radio inexplicably turned on by itself once again. This time, it wasn't just static. Faint voices, almost desperate in their tone, whispered words that I couldn't decipher. The sound seemed to emanate from the surrounding woods, as if the forest itself was trying to speak. I exchanged worried glances with Sarah and Anna, while Marcus rolled his eyes in disbelief, insisting that our imaginations were running wild. Then came the moment that shattered our fragile sense of safety. In the depths of the night, I awoke to the sound of shuffling footsteps outside our tent. My heart pounded as I unzipped the flap and peered out into the darkness. There, in the flickering light of the dying campfire, I saw a figure moving slowly among the trees, a robed silhouette that glided with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. I couldn't make out its features, but something about its presence sent an icy jolt of terror through me. I woke the others, and we huddled together in the dim light, each of us feeling the creeping dread of an unseen force closing in. "We need to stick together," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's get back to the RV and regroup." We gathered our meager belongings and made our way back through the tangled woods. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sounded like an attack from the darkness. My thoughts raced. Had those stories of cannibal cults and ancient rituals been mere legend, or was there a sinister truth lurking in the bayou's depths? The following morning, after a night of restless sleep punctuated by haunting dreams, we discovered fresh tracks near our campsite. Large, uneven footprints that suggested not just human passage, but something more, something hybrid. Marcus tried to rationalize it, arguing that animals in the area might be to blame. But deep down, I knew this was far beyond any ordinary wildlife encounter. Our journey took a dark turn when we inadvertently stumbled upon a clearing marked by an arrangement of stones and symbolic carvings, a makeshift altar that reeked of decay and ancient rituals. As we stood there, the oppressive silence was broken by distant chanting, a rhythmic drone that seemed to vibrate in the very air. The sight before us was almost surreal. A group of robed figures gathered in a circle, their faces obscured by hoods, performing what looked like a ritual. The air around them was thick with an unearthly energy, and I felt as though I had trespassed into a forbidden domain. "Do you see that?" Sarah whispered urgently, her eyes wide with terror and fascination. Marcus, for once, was speechless, and even Anna's sensitive eyes betrayed the horror of what we were witnessing. It became horrifyingly clear that we had encountered not just any group of cultists, but a cannibal cult whose origins were interwoven with the indigenous folklores of the Bayou. They believed in a malevolent entity, a doppelganger of humanity, a twisted spirit that demanded human sacrifice to feed its cursed existence. The ritual was not only an invocation, but also an offering, and we, as unwitting intruders, had become their focus. Fear and panic surged through me as I signaled for the group to retreat. "We need to go, now!" I urged, my voice shaking. But as we turned to flee, chaos erupted. One of the cultists noticed our presence and let out a piercing scream that echoed through the woods. The chanting turned frantic and violent. In an instant, our safe retreat was cut off by a barrage of frenzied shouts and the sound of heavy footsteps converging on our position. Marcus tried to maintain his logical facade, but I saw his eyes fill with genuine terror. Sarah, whose thrill-seeking nature had once made her the most daring of us, was now paralyzed by fear. Anna, ever the intuitive observer, clutched my arm as she whispered urgently, "We must stick together. This is no ordinary encounter. This is something evil." The ensuing moments were a blur of terror and desperate action. I grabbed what I could of our scattered belongings, pulling Marcus along as we sprinted through the underbrush. Behind us, the sinister sounds of pursuit grew louder. Footsteps, guttural chants, and the occasional snap of a branch under a heavy boot. I felt the weight of every decision we'd made leading up to this point. The broken equipment, the ignored warnings, and the group tensions that had simmered beneath the surface. In the heart-pounding scramble for survival, the supernatural and the violent merged. I managed to rally us together, directing our steps away from the clearing and deeper into the thicket, relying on Anna's uncanny sense of direction and the dim light of dawn breaking through the canopy. The forest was a maze, each turn offering both refuge and fresh peril. At one point, Sarah tripped over a concealed root, and in that moment of vulnerability I could see a flash of a robed hand reaching out from the darkness. I dragged her to her feet, and we pressed onward, hearts pounding and minds racing. As the morning wore on, we stumbled upon a small, decrepit cabin hidden among the trees. Desperation and instinct overrode caution. We had to find shelter, if only to regroup and plan our next move. The cabin's interior was sparse and musty, with broken furniture and peeling wallpaper that hinted at decades of neglect. It was in this grim refuge that we finally allowed ourselves to catch our breath and confront the harsh reality of our situation. Inside the cabin, we pored over the events of the previous night. Marcus's logical mind was shattered. He recounted with a trembling voice how he'd witnessed one cultist violently attacking an unseen force, a moment he couldn't rationalize away. Sarah's earlier bravado was replaced by a haunted silence, her eyes darting nervously to every shadow. Anna, meanwhile, was quietly mapping out the area in her mind, piecing together the subtle signs she'd observed. The carved symbols, the misplaced stones at the clearing, and the chilling sounds on the radio. And I, as the reluctant leader, felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not only for our survival, but for understanding the true horror that lay ahead. The cult, we came to learn, was not a random assembly of fanatics. They were an organized, violent group that had long operated in the isolated corners of the bayou. Their rituals, based on a twisted interpretation of indigenous traditions, were both a means of sustaining their dark power and a way of enforcing control over the region. Their worship of the malevolent doppelganger was not passive. It demanded blood, terror, and sacrifice. The sight of those robed figures moving with an almost predatory grace confirmed that the supernatural was not a distant myth here. It was a violent, all too real threat. Our next challenge was not only to escape the immediate danger, but to outsmart a force that was both human and beyond human. We spent the rest of the day strategizing in the dim light of the cabin. I suggested that we abandon the RV. Its malfunctioning equipment and the memories of the eerie radio transmissions made it a liability. Instead, we would rely on the natural cover of the forest and try to reach a nearby road that Anna remembered from an old map. But group tensions continued to simmer. Marcus, still clinging to his rational explanations, argued that perhaps the entire experience could be explained by stress and misinterpretation. Sarah's initial thrill-seeking attitude had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, palpable fear that colored every word she spoke. Anna, the quiet observer, remained focused on the facts, urging us to trust our instincts rather than our doubts. As dusk approached, we set out on our uncertain journey through the forest. The underbrush was thick, and the fading light made every rustle and snap of a twig feel like an omen. The forest, which had seemed merely mysterious the day before, now pulsed with the promise of danger. I could feel unseen eyes tracking our every movement, and every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat. It was on this second night that our nightmare escalated further. We found ourselves cornered in a narrow clearing when the cult reappeared. This time, their presence was unmistakable. A deliberate, orchestrated ambush. The robed figures emerged from the darkness with a terrifying precision. Their chants began anew, louder and more frenzied than before, as they closed in on us. In that moment, survival became an all-consuming instinct. I took charge, shouting for everyone to scatter in different directions to confuse the attackers. I led Marcus and Anna down a side trail, urging them to keep low and silent. Sarah, panic-stricken, lagged behind, and I could hear her cries echoing as the cultists closed in. The ensuing chaos was a maelstrom of terror, screams, the clash of shouts, and the pounding of feet on the forest floor. In the midst of the confusion, I caught a glimpse of one of the cult members lunging at Sarah. Without thinking, I darted back, adrenaline surging through every fiber of my being. I intercepted the attacker, and in the brutal struggle that followed, I felt a sickening mixture of fear and determination. The cultist's eyes, cold and unyielding, met mine for a brief, horrifying moment before he fell silent. I managed to drag Sarah away, her body trembling uncontrollably, as Marcus and Anna joined us with equally haunted expressions. It was clear that the cult was not merely intent on scaring us, they were violent, lethal, and fueled by a dark, supernatural purpose. The realization hit me like a blow. We were up against forces that defied normal human behavior, a sinister blend of ancient ritual and raw, unbridled brutality. The confrontation left us with physical injuries and deep emotional scars. We took shelter in a small hollow among the trees, where we treated our wounds and tried to piece together what we had witnessed. The bayou, once a symbol of natural beauty and escape, had transformed into a living nightmare. A place where the past and the present merged in violent, unholy rituals. In the days that followed, our desperate struggle for survival became a test of will and ingenuity. With every step deeper into the forest, we encountered further evidence of the cult's presence: abandoned ritual sites, scattered relics of their macabre practices, and the lingering sound of chants echoing in the distance. Our faulty RV was long abandoned in favor of trekking through the wilderness on foot, guided by Anna's intuitive sense of direction and our collective determination to reach safety. Despite the overwhelming fear, there were moments of camaraderie and resilience that shone through the darkness. I found myself not only fighting for my own life, but also for the lives of my friends. Marcus, once the unwavering skeptic, gradually began to accept that the terror we faced was as real as the blood coursing through our veins. Sarah, whose fearless nature had initially drawn her to the thrill of the unknown, discovered reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. And Anna, with her quiet wisdom, became our guiding light in a realm where every shadow harbored potential danger. Our final confrontation with the cult came unexpectedly one misty morning as we neared a narrow country road. The air was thick with fog, and the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. We had nearly reached safety when a group of cultists blocked our path. The leader, a gaunt figure with eyes that burned with unearthly intensity, stepped forward. His voice, low and menacing, echoed in the silence. In that moment, every unsaid fear and every harrowing memory culminated in a final stand. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and addressed him with as much courage as I could muster. "We're leaving. We're not a part of your dark rituals," I said, my voice steady despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm me. For a long, agonizing moment, the forest held its breath as the cult leader regarded me silently. Then, in an eruption of violence that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality, the ambush resumed. The ensuing struggle was brutal. In the chaos, I lost track of time and space, caught between the drive to survive and the relentless onslaught of the cult's savagery. I felt pain, loss, and the cold sting of fear as friends were struck down around me. Yet, amid the violence, our collective will to live burned brighter than any terror they could conjure. Marcus, Sarah, and Anna fought with every ounce of strength they possessed, and together, we managed to break free from the cult's deadly grip, staggering onto the road as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the fog. That day, as emergency vehicles finally arrived and the distant hum of civilization reasserted itself, I realized that we had escaped a nightmare that would haunt us forever. The supernatural reality of Mystic Bayou, its ghostly whispers, malevolent cult, and the raw violence of a dark, unyielding force had left scars that could never be entirely healed. We had encountered evil in its most primal form, and survival had come at a harrowing cost. Now, as I recount these events from a place of cautious recovery, I still struggle to understand the full measure of what transpired in those haunted woods. Mystic Bayou remains a forbidden chapter in my life, a place where the boundaries between the living and the damned blurred into a terrifying reality. The cult, with its roots in a twisted interpretation of indigenous rituals, proved that sometimes the legends we dismiss as folklore carry a darkness that is all too real. In the aftermath, I've come to accept that some encounters with the supernatural defy explanation. The violence we faced was not simply the result of deranged human actions. It was the manifestation of an ancient, malevolent power that had chosen us as its unwilling subjects. While I wish I could say that time has healed all wounds, the memory of that autumn remains etched into my soul, a constant reminder that in the depths of North Louisiana, the whispers of the Bayou can call forth nightmares that even the bravest hearts may not outrun. I share this story not to frighten, but to serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable horror. And though I now avoid the remote trails of mystic Bayou, I carry with me the lessons learned. That survival is often a matter of unity and courage in a world where ancient evils still lurk in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. My name is John, and I am forever changed by the night I stood against the darkness of mystic Bayou, a night when the supernatural bled into our reality, and the cost of survival was etched in every scar and every sleepless moment that followed. My name is David. I'm 42 years old, and this happened one stormy autumn in North Louisiana, a time when the ghosts of the past and the secrets of the land seemed to merge into a single, haunting presence. I left behind the relentless noise of the city, burdened by grief over the loss of my daughter, and hoped that the solitude of the backwoods might offer me a chance at healing and redemption. I had purchased an aging RV a few years back, thinking it would serve as a movable refuge from my sorrow. But as I drove down the winding roads toward Blackwater Hollow, a remote area just north of Ruston known for its dense forests and abandoned homesteads, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was also driving toward my own personal reckoning. The RV's creaking frame, its flickering lights, and an unreliable radio that sometimes sputtered with static were constant reminders of my own fragility. After several hours of travel, I finally arrived at a secluded, overgrown campground nestled deep within Blackwater Hollow. The landscape was somber and eerie. Gnarled trees loomed overhead, their branches tangled like the memories I was trying so desperately to forget. I parked the RV on a narrow, gravelly clearing that felt less like a campsite and more like a forgotten relic of another era. The isolation was immediate, and as I stepped outside, the weight of the silence pressed down on me. There was no cell signal, no comforting hum of modernity, just the whispers of the wind and the distant call of an owl. The first day was spent in a blur of mundane tasks. I inspected the RV, noting that the electrical system was erratic and the engine coughed and sputtered as if protesting the journey ahead. I fixed what little I could, patching wires and tightening bolts with a resigned determination. Every time the RV's radio crackled to life with inexplicable static or fragments of voices I couldn't quite decipher, a chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was merely the interference of a neglected machine in a remote area, yet deep inside I feared that perhaps the malfunction was more than a mechanical fault. It was a sign. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk in the woods to stretch my legs and clear my mind. The forest floor was littered with dry leaves and the occasional twisted root. As I ambled along a barely visible trail, memories of my daughter, her laughter, her small hand in mine, surfaced unbidden. The loss that had haunted me for years seemed to echo in every rustling leaf and creaking branch. I paused by a gnarled oak tree, its bark scarred with strange, cryptic symbols. The carvings, arranged in intricate patterns that resembled indigenous markings, made my heart tighten. I couldn't help but wonder if they were warnings, or remnants of forgotten rituals, left behind by those who once revered or feared these lands. That evening, after a meager dinner cooked on a portable stove, I settled in the RV with a heavy sense of loneliness. I tried to distract myself with the old radio, but instead of music or news, it filled the small space with soft, almost lullaby-like whispers. I strained to make out the words, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I heard my daughter's voice calling out to me in gentle tones. The sound was so faint and fragile that I questioned whether it was real or just my mind playing tricks on me. Sleep, when it eventually came, was punctuated by dreams of a little girl bathed in a ghostly glow, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. The next morning, I awoke to a persistent drizzle and the sound of distant murmuring. The RV's electrical failures had worsened overnight. The lights dimmed unpredictably and the radio remained stubbornly silent, as if it had finally run out of messages to deliver. Determined not to be cowed by the deteriorating conditions, I set out again on foot, driven by a need to find answers, or, at the very least, some evidence that I wasn't simply succumbing to grief-induced hallucinations. My path led me to a narrow dirt road where I encountered an old diner with peeling paint and a faded sign that read Marty's Place. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with nostalgia and unspoken warnings. There, I met an enigmatic man named Marty, whose lined face and slow, deliberate speech suggested he'd seen more than his share of the Hollow's secrets. Over a cup of weak coffee, Marty told me about the legends of Blackwater Hollow, the restless spirits of lost souls who wandered these woods, unable to find peace. He spoke of the ghost of a little girl seen by many locals, a spectral figure believed to be the soul of a child who had met an untimely end, wandering the area in search of forgiveness or release. His words unsettled me deeply, as they mirrored the visions I'd been having. Leaving the diner, I felt a mix of dread and an odd, compelling hope that perhaps these apparitions were trying to communicate something to me. Back at the RV, I discovered further anomalies. Scratched into the interior panel of the dashboard was a series of symbols similar to those on the oak tree. Outside, in the mud near the wheel well, faint impressions of tiny footprints led nowhere and then vanished abruptly. The evidence was unnerving, suggesting that the supernatural was not merely a projection of my grief, but something alive in the hollow. As dusk fell, the atmosphere thickened. I made a modest campfire outside the RV, its feeble flames fighting against the encroaching darkness. The forest around me was filled with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, but beneath their calls, I could almost hear soft, melodic weeping, a lament that resonated with the aching void inside me. I sat there for hours, lost in thought, when suddenly the whisper returned, clearer and more insistent than before. I strained to hear, and it sounded unmistakably like a child's plea. "Daddy, come play." The voice was fragile, sorrowful, and it shattered the last of my resolve to dismiss it as mere imagination. Heart hammering, I stepped away from the fire and toward the RV, every instinct screaming that I was being drawn deeper into a web of memories and the inexplicable presence that haunted these woods. The night stretched on, and as I lay in the darkness, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and the temperature dropped suddenly, as if the air itself mourned. Sleep was a distant concept that night, replaced instead by an endless vigil of anxious waiting. At dawn, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the RV, drenching me in a cold, unrelenting torrent as I resolved to explore further into the heart of Blackwater Hollow. With nothing but a backpack and a dwindling sense of purpose, I left the relative shelter of the RV and followed a narrow, winding trail into the deeper forest. The rain blurred my vision, but I pressed on, driven by the need to confront the apparition that haunted my dreams. As I ventured further, the forest revealed more of its secrets. I stumbled upon remnants of old homesteads, their wooden structures long abandoned, their windows like hollow eyes staring into the void. In one such dilapidated building, I found a diary, its pages yellowed and fragile. The entries spoke of a mother's grief, the loss of her child, and a desperate plea to the spirits for solace. The parallels with my own life were too uncanny to ignore. I couldn't help but feel that my presence in Blackwater Hollow was no coincidence, that perhaps the spirit of that grieving mother or her lost child had somehow reached out to me. As twilight descended once more, the forest seemed to transform. The gentle patter of rain gave way to an oppressive stillness, and the shadows grew bolder. I returned to my RV, seeking refuge in its familiar yet unreliable confines. That night, the supernatural manifestations intensified. The little girl's ghost appeared again, this time standing at the foot of my bed. Her form was delicate, almost translucent, and her eyes were filled with a profound sadness that mirrored my own. She did not speak, but her presence was a silent accusation, a reminder of all that I had lost and all that I had failed to save. In a state of numb disbelief, I approached the apparition. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I wish I could have done something." For a few agonizing moments, nothing happened except the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant, mournful howling of the wind. Then, as if in response to my confession, the ghost slowly reached out a small, spectral hand, brushing against my cheek. The touch was icy, yet strangely comforting, a bittersweet communion that filled me with both sorrow and a faint glimmer of hope. In that fragile exchange, I understood that this ghost was not a malevolent force but a tragic echo of my own pain, a manifestation of the guilt that had haunted me for so long. She was a call for absolution, a plea for me to find a way to forgive myself. Over the next few nights the ghost would visit, each time leaving me with a deeper understanding of the wounds I carried. I began to talk to her, sharing my memories, my regrets, and the love I still harbored for the daughter I'd lost. The spectral visits were never frightening now. They were raw, emotional encounters that forced me to confront the darkness within me. One particularly stormy night, as the RV's systems finally failed completely and I was plunged into utter darkness, the ghost's presence became almost overwhelming. Rain hammered the roof, and the wind howled like the anguished cries of the lost. I stepped outside into the tempest, driven by a desperate need to face the apparition head-on. There, in the swirling chaos of rain and wind, I saw her clearly, a small figure with luminous eyes, standing on a muddy path that wound through the forest. I called out to her, my voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm here. I want to understand. I want to forgive." For what felt like an eternity, the storm raged around us, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the wind stilled and the rain tapered off. The little ghost approached, her movements slow and deliberate. In that surreal, suspended moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, a merging of grief, memory, and the possibility of healing. I knelt on the sodden ground and, with tears mingling with rain, I whispered all the apologies and love I had never been able to express when she was alive. The forest, the hollow itself, seemed to listen, its ancient silence bearing witness to my confession. In the days that followed, the oppressive heaviness that had shrouded Blackwater Hollow began to lift ever so slightly. The ghostly appearances diminished to quiet, almost comforting visits, and the RV's systems inexplicably returned to a semblance of normalcy. The static on the radio was replaced by gentle, ambient sounds, a soft wind rustling through the trees, the distant murmur of a stream. I took these changes as signs that I was on the path to redemption, that my acceptance of the past had begun to ease the spectral curse that bound both the spirit and my own tortured soul. I eventually decided to leave Blackwater Hollow. feeling that I had taken the first necessary steps toward healing. With a heavy yet hopeful heart, I repaired what little I could of my RV and mapped out a route back to civilization. As I drove away, I looked back at the dense forest, its secrets still hidden beneath layers of mist and memory. I knew that I would carry the echoes of Blackwater Hollow with me forever, but they no longer haunted me with terror. Instead, they reminded me that sometimes the most painful journeys are the ones that lead us to forgiveness, and that even in the darkest places, there can be a spark of light. Now, as I recount these events, I see Blackwater Hollow not as a cursed place of unrelenting despair, but as a crucible in which my grief was transformed into acceptance. The spectral presence of my lost daughter was not a cruel reminder of my failures, but a gentle guide leading me toward the long-sought redemption of my own heart. My journey through that eerie landscape taught me that healing is not about forgetting the past, but about embracing it, scars and all. I have returned to the city a changed man. The bustling streets and neon lights no longer overwhelm me as they once did. Instead, I find solace in quiet moments, in the simple acts of remembering and forgiving. The little ghost of Blackwater Hollow still visits me sometimes. Only now, her presence is a reminder that love endures beyond loss, and that even the most haunted souls can find a way to be at peace. This experience in Blackwater Hollow will forever be etched in my memory, a testament to the power of confronting one's inner demons and the possibility of emerging from darkness into light. Though my journey began as an escape from unbearable pain, it became, in the end, a pilgrimage toward self-forgiveness and hope. And while I no longer live in isolation, I remain forever connected to that small, spectral voice that once guided me through the stormy nights of North Louisiana. My name is David, and I carry with me the bittersweet echoes of a haunted hollow, a place where the past and the supernatural intertwined to teach me that the journey toward healing is paved with both sorrow and the promise of redemption. My name is Jordan Lewis, and I'm 32. This happened in the late autumn of 2023, when my friends and I decided to escape the mundane routine of our lives for an RV camping trip in the remote depths of Cace Ridge National Forest, near Natchitoches, Louisiana. I had long been drawn to the wild unknown, and the promise of isolated beauty mingled with the thrill of untold stories was irresistible. We piled into our rickety RV, an old, beat-up model that had seen better days. The engine coughed as we set off, and it wasn't long before we realized our ride was as temperamental as the legends we were about to encounter. My companions were Emily Sanchez, a practical and compassionate soul who exuded quiet strength despite the scars of her past. Mark Green, my sarcastic and cautious friend, who never hesitated to point out the potential dangers lurking behind every shadow, and Layla Robinson, whose impulsive nature and fascination with the paranormal often pushed us to the brink of peril. After a long drive through winding back roads and dusty byways, we finally arrived at our destination, a secluded clearing deep within the heart of Cace Ridge National Forest. The forest was a labyrinth of towering pines and ancient oaks, their gnarled branches arching overhead like the spines of long-forgotten beasts. The RV, parked on a small, uneven patch of ground, looked like a misplaced relic in a land that had long outlived its own time. Almost immediately, trouble reared its head. The RV's cooler failed to keep our supplies cold, and the heating system sputtered weakly as the chill of the approaching night settled in. Emily quickly organized us to salvage what little we could, her calm demeanor belying the undercurrent of worry in her eyes. Mark grumbled about our luck, remarking that the equipment was as old as the forest legends themselves. Layla, ever the enthusiast, saw our plight as just another twist in our adventure, a challenge that might lead us to unearth something truly extraordinary. That first night, as dusk melted into an inky darkness, something felt off. I was lying awake on a threadbare cot in the cramped space of our RV when I first heard it, a low, almost imperceptible rustling coming from the woods, followed by distant, mournful cries that sent shivers crawling up my spine. I tried to dismiss it as the wind playing tricks, but deep down I knew these sounds were more than just nature's nocturne. The following morning, while I was sipping lukewarm coffee by the RV's small window, Emily pointed out something unusual. Near the RV, etched crudely into a large pine, were strange markings, symbols that looked both ancient and disturbingly modern. "I've heard local lore about these," she whispered, her voice trembling just a fraction. "They say something malevolent roams these woods, a spirit or entity of unspeakable sorrow and wrath." Mark's skepticism was evident as he scoffed. "Ghost stories to scare tourists, right?" But even he couldn't mask the unease in his eyes. Layla, her curiosity piqued, began snapping photos and recording the eerie scene on her handheld camera, insisting we document every anomaly. By midday, the initial excitement of the wilderness was marred by escalating tensions. The RV's mechanical troubles persisted, and our supplies were dwindling. We had argued about our next move. Should we push further into the forest to find a place with better reception for help, or hunker down and wait it out? I insisted we explore. The legends beckoned us to uncover their truth. Mark, always the voice of reason, counseled caution, while Emily urged us to balance our need for answers with the reality of our situation. Layla's eyes sparkled with the thrill of discovery, eager to see evidence of the paranormal. As dusk approached once again, we made a collective decision. I led a small expedition into the thick of the forest, targeting an abandoned cabin we had spotted on the outskirts of our clearing, a relic from a bygone era. With Mark reluctantly at my side and Layla trailing behind, we ventured off, leaving Emily in the RV to keep watch. The air grew colder and damper as we trod deeper into the forest, and every snap of a twig or rustle in the underbrush heightened our senses. The cabin, barely visible through the dense foliage, exuded an aura of decay and desolation. Its weathered wood and broken windows gave it the appearance of a forgotten monument to a dark past. As we stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. The interior was littered with remnants of a violent history, shattered tools, animal bones arranged in disturbing patterns, and faded carvings on the walls that hinted at ritualistic practices. Layla's camera flashed repeatedly as she documented every unsettling detail. In the dim light, Mark muttered, "This isn't just an abandoned building. It's like a shrine to something sinister." And I felt the weight of his words as I examined the carvings. They were symbols I recognized from old Cajun folklore, tales of vengeful spirits and cannibalistic rites practiced by indigenous cults long ago. Though I'd always dismissed these stories as superstition, standing in that haunted cabin made it impossible to ignore the chill of reality. We returned to the RV with our findings, hearts pounding and minds racing with questions. That night, with tension thick in the air, we gathered in the RV's cramped common area. The wind howled outside, and the RV's windows rattled under the force of an unseen hand. It was then that the true terror began. I had just begun to recount our discoveries when Layla's voice cut through the oppressive silence. "Look outside," she said, her tone laced with both excitement and dread. Mark and I joined her at the window, peering into the moonlit gloom. There, at the tree line, was a dark silhouette, an indistinct, shifting form that moved with a deliberate, predatory grace. It was as if the figure was watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The figure did not immediately advance, it merely lingered, a silent sentinel on the edge of our fragile sanctuary. Emily, who had been quiet until then, whispered, "This must be it, the spirit they warned us about." I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being marked, that our intrusion into this forsaken place had not gone unnoticed by the malevolent forces of the forest. The following days were a harrowing blur of escalating dread and desperate survival. The entity, which we later learned was steeped in local lore, a hybrid terror sometimes described as a skinwalker or an echo of a cannibalistic indigenous spirit, began its relentless stalking. At first, it was subtle, an unexplained knock on the RV's side, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot when no one was around, the eerie reflection of a shadow in the rearview mirror. But soon, the signs became impossible to ignore. One moonless night, as I lay awake listening to the RV's groans and creaks, I felt a cold, slimy hand brush against my leg. I bolted upright, heart hammering, only to find nothing but darkness and the oppressive presence of the unknown. I called out to Emily, but my voice was swallowed by the vast, indifferent forest. Mark's skepticism was replaced by raw fear, and even Layla's insatiable curiosity faltered in the face of a terror that was no longer confined to whispered legends. We attempted to regroup during the daylight hours, our small group strained by the constant threat. The RV, now more a prison than a sanctuary, groaned under the strain of malfunctioning equipment. The heating system failed intermittently, leaving us shivering in the bitter cold, and our dwindling supplies added to the growing sense of desperation. Arguments flared. Mark and I clashed over whether to abandon our position and attempt to drive out of the forest, while Emily pleaded for a more measured approach, balancing caution with our desperate need to understand what was stalking us. Layla, ever the chronicler of the bizarre, insisted on venturing out again to capture more evidence, even as her eyes betrayed her own mounting terror. It was during one of these heated discussions that the unthinkable happened. In the early evening, as we gathered around a small, flickering fire outside the RV, a makeshift attempt to fend off the encroaching chill, a piercing scream shattered the fragile calm. It was a cry of agony, human yet twisted by something inhuman. We all froze. I was the first to react, sprinting toward the source of the scream with adrenaline surging through my veins. I found Emily a few yards away, standing over a grotesque tableau. In the dim light, a figure lay crumpled on the ground, its features obscured by the shadows. But one detail was unmistakable: a deep, ragged wound across its chest that glowed ominously in the firelight. The creature, if it could be called that, was neither wholly human nor entirely beast. It had the contorted posture of someone in torment, yet its eyes burned with an intensity that was all too supernatural. Mark arrived seconds later, his usual sarcasm stripped away, replaced by a stark terror. "We need to get out of here," he gasped. But before we could process his words, a guttural, otherworldly growl resonated from the darkness beyond the firelight. The sound was low, resonant, and filled with malice. It wasn't just a call, it was a promise, a vow that our presence in these cursed woods had provoked something ancient and violent. Panic set in as we scrambled back to the RV, our minds racing with the implications of what we had witnessed. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dread and despair. Mark's eyes darted to every shadow, while Layla frantically reviewed the images on her camera, her hands trembling. Emily's face was ashen, yet she maintained a stoic determination to keep us together. I knew that we had to confront the truth. The supernatural presence in these woods was not a passive haunt, but an active, predatory force. That night, with the creature's presence looming just outside the thin walls of our RV, we made a desperate plan. Drawing upon bits of local folklore that Layla had gathered from old Cajun tales, we prepared rudimentary defenses. We piled old wood into makeshift barricades, set out jars of oil to create a crude fire barrier, and even attempted to piece together an incantation from fragmented legends. The plan was desperate and untested, but as the wind picked up and the forest seemed to moan in anticipation, we had little choice. In the darkness, the entity revealed itself in full. It moved silently at first, its form shifting between that of a dark, sinuous shadow and a twisted, almost human shape. At times, it bore the semblance of a skinwalker, its eyes glinting with predatory intelligence, its limbs contorted in unnatural angles. At others, it seemed more like an echo of an ancient, cannibalistic cult, the remnants of a past filled with ritualistic violence. Whatever it was, its intent was clear. It was hunting us. The ensuing confrontation was a blur of terror and desperate action. I found myself face to face with the creature as it lunged toward me. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning oil and the metallic tang of fear. I swung a heavy branch, the best weapon I could muster, while Mark shouted incoherently from behind. In that moment, it became clear that this was not a mere haunting to be observed from a safe distance. This was a violent force that would not hesitate to kill. As I fought, I remembered the incantation we had pieced together from whispered Cajun lore. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I shouted the words, my voice cracking under the weight of terror. For a moment, the creature hesitated. Its formless eyes locked onto mine as if it were measuring the worth of my defiance. Then, as if enraged by my audacity, it roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the forest, and attacked with renewed fury. The struggle was chaotic and unrelenting. I felt the searing pain of a clawed swipe across my arm, and the burning sensation of fear as my vision blurred with adrenaline and sweat. Mark managed to land a solid blow with an old metal pipe, and for a brief instant the creature recoiled. Yet, it was not defeated. It was merely delayed. Layla, her hands trembling yet determined, continued to record every moment, as though bearing witness to a truth that the world might someday understand. In the frantic melee, the RV's door burst open and Emily stepped out, her face set in a grim mask of resolve. "Enough!" she cried, her voice carrying over the tumult like a command. She retrieved a small, weathered book from a hidden compartment in the RV, a relic given to her by a local elder before we set out, said to contain forgotten rights and protections. With trembling hands, she recited passages that seemed to weave the very fabric of the night around us. As her words filled the air, the creature's advance faltered, its shadowy form wavering under the force of something ancient and unyielding. Time seemed to stretch as we all joined together, each of us, in our own way, fighting back against an enemy that defied reason. The entity's violent onslaught gradually slowed, its guttural growls softening to a low, almost mournful lament. It hovered on the periphery of our circle, its presence no longer that of an outright attacker but of a wounded, tormented spirit, a remnant of past horrors and rituals best left undisturbed. In the aftermath of that night, as dawn broke over the tangled forest, we found ourselves battered, both in body and spirit. Mark's sarcastic demeanor had vanished, replaced by a sober recognition of our own vulnerability. Layla's fervor to document the paranormal had been tempered by the raw, unfiltered reality of survival. Emily's quiet strength shone brighter than ever, a beacon in the darkness, as she comforted us with the hope that we might still make it out alive. The RV, though still riddled with mechanical faults and inadequate supplies, became our fortress of fragile safety. We patched up our wounds, both physical and emotional, and resolved to leave the forest at first light. The entity, or whatever it was that had tormented us, receded into the shadows as if acknowledging our determination to depart its domain. Yet, its presence lingered in every creak of the RV, in every whisper of the wind among the trees. I spent the long hours on the road reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The forest had revealed a side of nature that was raw and unforgiving. A world where ancient legends were not mere stories, but living, breathing horrors that demanded respect and caution. The encounter with the supernatural had stripped away the veneer of modern comfort, exposing the primal truth that we are but fragile beings in a vast, indifferent wilderness. Even now, weeks later, I find myself haunted by flashes of that night, the piercing cry, the shifting form of the entity, the desperate incantations, and Emily's resolute face. I carry scars, both seen and unseen, and I know that the memory of those moments will forever linger, a constant reminder that some forces in the wild remain beyond our control. In the end, our ordeal in Cace National Forest was not merely an encounter with a vengeful spirit or a monstrous legend. It was a confrontation with our deepest fears and a test of our humanity. We learned that survival sometimes means facing not only the tangible dangers of malfunctioning equipment and harsh environments, but also the intangible horrors that lie in the dark recesses of forgotten lore. The forest, with all its ancient secrets and malevolent presences, had forced us to acknowledge that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the spaces between reality and myth. As I pen down these memories, I do so with the sober understanding that our experience was both a curse and a gift. It revealed to us the fragile boundaries between the natural and the supernatural, between life and death. And though I hope never to venture back into those haunted woods, a part of me will always be drawn to the mysteries that lie hidden in the depths of Cace National Forest, where every rustle in the trees might be the echo of something ancient, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path. My name is Jordan Lewis, and I am forever changed by that night. I carry with me the scars of a battle against an enemy that was as real as it was impossible to comprehend. And as I continue my journey through life, I do so with a deep, abiding respect for the wild, a realm where survival is not just about escaping physical danger, but about confronting the darkness that resides within both nature and ourselves. My name is Derek Marshall, and I'm 45. This happened in the early days of November 2023, when I decided to leave behind the relentless noise of the city and seek solace in the isolated beauty of the Atchafalaya Basin. I'd been a freelance writer for years, but recent personal losses had left me numb, searching for something. A glimmer of hope, perhaps a spark of inspiration, to pull me out of the depths of my grief. So I rented an old RV, loaded it with a few essentials and my ever-present journal, and drove deep into Louisiana's wild Bayou country. The RV was a battered relic, its engine wheezing to life as if protesting every mile we put behind us. I knew the vehicle wasn't perfect. In fact, its aging equipment and intermittent power outages were well known among locals. Yet, in that very imperfection, I found a fitting metaphor for my own fragile state of mind. Arriving at a secluded campsite along a narrow, winding dirt road, I parked near a cluster of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of damp earth, a stark contrast to the sterile urban environment I'd escaped. That first night was strangely unsettling. The RV's heater sputtered and died repeatedly, leaving me shivering as I tried to write in my journal by the dim light of a battery-powered lamp. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Somewhere out in the bayou, beyond the immediate glow of the RV, I heard soft splashing sounds and the distant murmur of voices. whispers that seemed to float on the humid air. At first, I chalked it up to the usual nocturnal chorus of frogs and insects, but there was an eerie quality to the sounds, as if they were trying to communicate something. Over the next few days, I began to notice other unsettling details. In the early morning, I discovered that some of my personal items, my pen, a well-worn notebook, had mysteriously vanished from their usual spots, only to reappear later in inexplicable places. On one occasion, I found my journal tucked away near the entrance of a small, decrepit shack hidden by overgrown vegetation. The sight of that forgotten structure sent a chill through me, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. I decided to explore the area. One foggy afternoon, with my RV parked a safe distance from the main path, I ventured out on foot toward the shack. The overgrown brush seemed to part reluctantly as I navigated the tangled undergrowth. The shack itself was a small, dilapidated building with peeling paint and broken windows. Its presence felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of a long-forgotten tragedy. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. I discovered old photographs scattered on the floor, yellowed with age, depicting a solitary Cajun woman in a worn dress standing by the water's edge. In one of the corners, I found a tattered diary bound in cracked leather. The diary belonged to a recluse who had once called this shack home, a person whose words were soaked with sorrow and loneliness. The entries recounted heartbreak, isolation, and mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the bayou decades ago. As I read, I felt as if the diarist's pain was reaching out to me, resonating with my own sense of loss and despair. After that day, the bayou's strange phenomena grew more intense. At dusk, as the humid air settled into a heavy stillness, I would see flickering lights dancing over the murky water. At times, those lights coalesced into fleeting silhouettes that moved silently among the cypress trees. I began to suspect that these were no mere tricks of the light, but perhaps echoes of the past, or even manifestations of a restless spirit tied to the tragic history of this place. One evening, while I sat on the creaking steps of my RV, the distant sound of soft whispers reached my ears once more. The voices were low, almost imperceptible, yet laden with emotion, like fragments of a long-forgotten prayer. I felt compelled to follow them, despite the growing sense of dread in my stomach. Clutching my journal tightly, I stepped away from the relative safety of the RV and made my way toward the source of the whispers. The trail led me to a narrow, waterlogged path along the bayou's edge, where the dense fog obscured everything beyond a few feet. I could barely see my own hand in front of my face when the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like the currents of the stagnant water. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the voices fell silent. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my ears, and in that silence, I felt an indescribable presence, an overwhelming sensation of sorrow and longing that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the bayou. Back at the RV, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, haunted by visions of the Cajun woman from the photographs and the anguished words of the diary. In my mind, the whispers became a constant refrain, urging me to remember, to understand, and perhaps to reconcile with my own buried grief. I began to suspect that the bayou was not just a place of physical isolation, but also a mirror to my innermost emotions, a realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead, between memory and reality, blurred into one. The turning point came on a particularly stormy night. Rain hammered against the RV, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. In the midst of the tempest, the power flickered out entirely, plunging me into total darkness. Clutching a flashlight, I decided to revisit the shack, feeling that it held the key to the bayou's secrets, and to my own healing. Navigating through the downpour, I trudged through knee-deep water until I reached the shack. The building loomed before me, its silhouette barely discernible against the stormy sky. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was even more dilapidated than I remembered, but now it felt charged with an almost tangible energy. In the center of the room lay an old, dust-covered mirror that I hadn't noticed before. Something about the mirror caught my eye, an almost magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. As I approached, the surface of the mirror began to shimmer. My own reflection wavered and then dissolved, replaced by a spectral image of the Cajun woman from the photographs. Her eyes were deep pools of sorrow, and she seemed to be silently pleading with me. For several long moments I was transfixed by the vision, feeling her pain as if it were my own. The mirror, it seemed, was a portal, an echo of a life filled with unspoken regret and loss. Then, in a voice as soft and fragile as the rustling of leaves, she spoke. "You carry the weight of sorrow, but you must let it go," the voice murmured. It was neither threatening nor comforting, but imbued with an urgency that pierced through the storm's clamor. I tried to respond, to ask her who she was and what she needed, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, as if acknowledging an unspoken truth. As the storm raged on, I spent what felt like hours in that haunted room, communing with the spectral presence. The experience was both terrifying and cathartic. I realized that the ghost was not here to harm me, but rather to help me confront the grief that had haunted me for so long. The whispers, the missing items, the flickering lights, all were manifestations of the Bayou's spirit, urging me to face the pain I had long tried to bury. When I finally emerged from the shack, the storm had subsided, and a quiet, eerie calm had settled over the landscape. The air was crisp, and the bayou, now illuminated by the soft glow of a rising moon, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. I returned to my RV, feeling an unexpected lightness in my heart. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, an inkling that, perhaps, in embracing my past, I could find a path to healing. Over the next few days, I devoted myself to exploring every corner of the bayou. I revisited the shack, poring over the diary and the photographs, piecing together the tragic story of the recluse who had once lived there. I learned that she had been ostracized by her community, her life marred by heartbreak and solitude, and that her spirit had lingered long after her untimely death, a silent witness to the injustices she had suffered. As I read her words, I recognized echoes of my own pain, and slowly I began to understand that the bayou was offering me a mirror to my soul. Yet, even as I embraced this newfound clarity, the supernatural signs persisted. The strange lights continued to dance over the water at dusk, and on quiet nights the soft whispers would rise again, guiding me deeper into the mysteries of the bayou. I took them as both warnings and invitations to remember, to grieve, and ultimately to heal. One night, as I sat on the steps of the RV, the moon high above casting silver shadows across the bayou, I heard a familiar murmur, a gentle, almost imperceptible voice that seemed to call my name. I followed the sound to a small clearing where the remains of an old burial mound lay hidden beneath tangled brush. There, in the stillness of the night, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to the past. I laid down on the cool, damp ground, my heart open to the quiet lessons of the earth, and allowed the memories of loss and love to wash over me like the gentle lapping of water along the shore. In that moment of vulnerable surrender, I realized that the true haunting of the Atchafalaya was not the presence of a malevolent ghost, but the way the bayou forced its visitors to confront the inevitability of loss and the enduring power of memory. The spectral presence, the Cajun recluse, was not an enemy to be vanquished, but a guide leading me toward acceptance. I began to understand that grief, like the waters of the bayou, ebbs and flows, and that healing comes not from forgetting, but from embracing the depths of our sorrow and finding beauty in its raw honesty. As the days turned into weeks, I found a rhythm in the isolation. I wrote fervently in my journal, pouring out thoughts and feelings that I had long kept hidden. The bayou, with all its mysteries and melancholy, became both a muse and a mentor. I crafted stories from its whispered legends, stories of love, loss, and the relentless march of time. And though I knew I would eventually have to leave this enchanted yet sorrowful place, I was grateful for the clarity it had bestowed upon me. My journey in the Atchafalaya Basin taught me that isolation, no matter how profound, can be a crucible for transformation. The supernatural occurrences, the missing items, the spectral mirror, the murmuring voices, were not manifestations of evil, but echoes of a history filled with heartache and resilience. They reminded me that even in the darkest corners of our lives, there is room for redemption and renewal. When I finally left the bayou, my RV's engine sputtering to life one last time as I drove away, I carried with me a new sense of purpose. The Atchafalaya had stripped away my defenses and forced me to confront the pain I had long avoided. In that confrontation, I discovered that healing is not a destination but a journey that, like the winding paths of the bayou, may be fraught with shadows and mysteries, yet ultimately leads us back to ourselves. Now, as I sit at my desk in the city, far from the humid embrace of the bayou, I still hear the echoes of that distant land. The memory of those whispered voices and flickering lights lingers in my mind, a reminder that our past, however painful, is an integral part of who we are. And whenever the weight of the city's chaos grows too heavy, I close my eyes and return, in spirit, to the quiet, sacred solitude of the Atchafalaya Basin, a place where sorrow and beauty dance together under the watchful gaze of a timeless moon. My name is Derek Marshall, and my time in the Atchafalaya changed me profoundly. It was a journey into isolation and grief that ultimately led me to find a spark of hope amid the shadows. In that eerie, haunted bayou, I learned that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from running away from our past, but from embracing it with an open heart.